Space is vast, and Starfleet had charted only a fraction of it. But what happens when something arrives that no sensor array, no database, and no first contact protocol was ever built to explain? The USS Enterprise D cruised through a quiet stretch of the Alpha Quadrant, 3 days out from a diplomatic rendezvous with a delegation from EFROS 4. It was a kind of assignment Captain Jean-Luc Picard privately enjoyed, low stakes, high ceremony, an opportunity to practice his Efrosian and reacquaint himself with a species whose culture placed enormous value on formal correctness. Commander William Riker had the bridge for the evening watch, Data at Ops running a routine diagnostic on the deflector array, and Counselor Troy curled into her chair with the particular stillness she wore when nothing much was happening, and she intended to enjoy it. Then the universe hiccuped. Lieutenant Worf's console erupted in a cascade of amber warnings, half a second before the ship itself seemed to flinch. Not a shudder through the deck plating, not an alert klaxon, but something stranger, a wrongness that every soul on the bridge felt in the base of their skull. Gone as quickly as it came. Report, Riker said, already on his feet. Sensors registered an anomalous event 400 kilometers off the port bow, Data said, fingers dancing across his panel within human precision. Duration, 0.9 seconds. I am unable to classify the phenomenon. It does not correspond to any known subspace disturbance, temporal distortion, or dimensional rift pattern in the ship's database. Cause. Riker pressed. Unknown, sir. The anomaly did not register as an energy discharge, a gravitational event, or a spatial rupture. And yet something crossed through it. Data's head tilted a fraction, the closest he came to visible unease. Internal sensors have detected a life sign in Cargo Bay 4. Human physiology. It was not there 90 seconds ago. Worf was already moving toward the turbolift before Riker gave the order. Security to Cargo Bay 4, the Klingon growled into his comm badge, and there was something in his voice, not fear. Worf did not experience fear the way humans described it, but a coiled readiness that told the rest of the bridge crew this was not a false alarm. Picard arrived on the bridge 40 seconds later, drawn by the yellow alert, still fastening the top clasp of his uniform. Number 1. Unidentified life sign. Materialized inside the hull with no transporter signature, no shuttle contact, nothing on long-range sensors beforehand, Riker reported. Worf's team is en route. Materialized, Picard repeated slowly, the word sitting strangely in his mouth. Not beamed. Not by any technology we can detect, sir, said Data. Picard's jaw set. In 26 years of service, he had learned to treat the impossible as merely the unexplained, a category, not a dead end. Yellow alert. Shields up. Mr. Data. Continue analysis of that anomaly signature. Number 1, you're with me. Cargo Bay 4 smelled of machine oil and the faint ozone tang of idle transporter buffers. 6 crates of medical supplies sat stacked along the starboard wall undisturbed, and standing in the open space between them, hands in the pockets of a rumpled brown jacket that looked entirely unlike any fabric replicated aboard a Starfleet vessel, was a man. He was unremarkable to look at. Medium height, sandy hair, an expression that seemed to be permanently balanced on the edge of a joke he hadn't decided whether to tell yet. He turned as the cargo bay doors hissed open, and 4 security officers fanned out around him with phasers drawn, Worf at their center like a wall of muscle and barely restrained violence. Ah, the man said, looking around at the crates, the consoles, the 4 humming ceiling-mounted sensor clusters, and finally at the phasers pointed at his chest. Okay, not heaven. Not the other place either. That's actually kind of a relief. Identify yourself, Worf ordered, his voice dropping into the register he reserved for genuine threats. Gabriel. The man spread his hands, palms out, in a gesture that managed to look both harmless and faintly mocking. And before the big guy with the ridges on his forehead does something we'll both regret, I'm not armed. Well, he considered. Not in the sense you mean. Picard and Riker entered a moment later, and Gabriel's eyes went straight to Picard with an unsettling immediacy, as if he'd already cataloged the chain of command from a single glance at the room. Captain, Gabriel said, inclining his head with theatrical politeness. Nice ship. Very clean lines. Federation, right? Roddenberry would be thrilled. The reference meant nothing to anyone present, but something in the man's tone, easy, knowing, entirely too comfortable for someone surrounded by armed security aboard a starship he had no business being on, made Picard's instincts sharpen rather than relax. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You have appeared aboard my vessel without authorization, by means our censors cannot explain. I would very much like to understand how and why. Would you, though? Gabriel's grin widened, but there was something tired underneath it, something that didn't quite match the performance. Because, in my experience, how tends to break people's brains a little. Short version. I opened a door that shouldn't exist, and I walked through it to get away from a family reunion that was going considerably worse than expected. Didn't exactly aim. Ended up here. Family reunion, Riker repeated flatly. Phaser still trained on the stranger's center mass. You have no idea. Something flickered behind Gabriel's eyes, old and heavy, and gone again before anyone could be certain they'd seen it. Look, I get it. Strange guy pops out of nowhere. No ship, no signature, security's twitchy. Very reasonable. Go ahead and scan me. Won't find weapons. Won't find explosives. You might find some readings that don't make a whole lot of sense. But hey, free entertainment for your science department. Picard studied him for a long moment. There was no visible threat display, no aggressive posturing. If anything, the man seemed almost bored by the armed response, which was, in Picard's considerable experience, far more unsettling than fear would have been. Confidence-like that came from one of two places: profound foolishness or genuine, overwhelming capability. Escort Mr. Gabriel to sickbay for examination, Picard said. Full security detail. Mr. Worf, you will accompany personally. Captain. Worf began, clearly unhappy with anything less than a containment field and a level 10 force field between this stranger and the rest of the crew. I am aware of the risk, Lieutenant, Picard said quietly. I am also aware that if he intended U.S. harm, he has had ample opportunity already. He turned back to Gabriel. You will cooperate fully with Dr. Crusher's examination. Afterward, you and I are going to have a conversation. Counting on it, Captain. Gabriel's grin returned, sharp and easy. Been a long time since anybody asked me a question they actually wanted the true answer to. As the security team formed up around him and marched him toward the turbolift, Gabriel glanced back once at the cargo bay, at the hum of machinery, the quiet efficiency of a ship built by people who had never once had to fight a war in heaven, and something crossed his face that none of the humans present quite knew how to read. It might have been relief. It might have been grief. It might, though none of them could have guessed it yet, have been the first honest thing he'd felt in centuries. On the bridge, Data continued running his analysis, brow furrowed in the particular way that meant a genuine, fascinating puzzle. Commander, he said quietly to Riker, once the away team's report had come through, the anomaly that preceded this individual's arrival does not merely defy classification. Its energy signature, such as it was, appears to have violated 3 separate conservation laws simultaneously for a fraction of a second, before resolving without residual disturbance. In English, Data. Something crossed into our universe that should not, by any physical model we possess, be able to exist within it. Data turned from his console, his golden eyes catching the low light of the bridge. Whatever or whoever Gabriel is, Commander, I do not believe he arrived by any technology at all. Riker looked toward the turbolift doors, already closed, carrying an easy smiling stranger toward sickbay under armed guard, a man who had walked out of nothing and called it a family reunion. Then I suppose, Riker said slowly, we're about to find out what he did arrive by. If you want to see more characters beamed into the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Sickbay was quiet at this hour, the overhead lighting dimmed to its evening cycle, and Beverly Crusher had been 3 sentences into explaining ossification patterns in Terrian juveniles to her medical student when the comm chirped with Worf's voice announcing an incoming security escort. She'd barely had time to clear the biobed before the doors parted and 4 armed officers walked in surrounding a man in a rumpled brown jacket who looked, more than anything, like he was here for a routine physical he found mildly amusing. Doctor, Worf said, positioning himself between the bio bed and the door with the immovable patience of a man who intended to stay exactly there for as long as necessary. The captain has ordered a full examination. So I heard. Crusher gestured to the bio bed. If you lie down, Mr. Gabriel. Just Gabriel. He hopped up onto the bed with an ease that suggested he'd done this before, in one form or another, though the readiness in his posture didn't quite match the casualness of his tone. Fair warning, Doc. You're not going to like what you find. Or rather, you're going to love it. And then it's going to keep you up at night. I'll take my chances. Crusher activated the diagnostic array above the bed and watched the display begin to populate. And then watched it stop making sense. The baseline readings came through clean enough at first, bipedal, bilaterally symmetric, roughly the mass and density expected of an adult human male. But as the deeper scan cycled through cellular and subcellular resolution, the numbers began contradicting themselves in ways that made Crusher's trained eye narrow with genuine alarm. Cellular structures that registered as simultaneously present and absent depending on scan angle. An energy signature woven through every level of his physiology that the tricorder spectral analysis simply refused to categorize, cycling instead through a dozen failed classifications a second. Organic, then not organic, then something the computer had no vocabulary for at all. Your heart rate, Crusher said slowly, is currently registering as 41 beats per minute, and also as 0, simultaneously. Yeah, that tracks. Gabriel didn't seem remotely concerned. Technically, I don't need the whole cardiovascular thing. It's more of a courtesy. Makes people comfortable. A courtesy, Crusher repeated. You'd stare a lot harder if I just floated there not breathing. He shrugged. Also, I get why the machine's confused. I'm not exactly built out of the same parts your usual patients are. Crusher set the tricorder down, arms crossed, studying him with the particular clinical focus she usually reserved for the strangest anomalies the Alpha Quadrant had thrown at her. And in 20 years of Starfleet service, that was a considerable list. What are you built out of then? Something shifted behind Gabriel's easy expression. Not evasion exactly, more like a man deciding, in real time, how much truth a room was ready to hold. Grace, he said finally. That's the word for it, where I'm from. It's not tissue. It's not energy, not the way your instruments measure it. It's closer to conviction, maybe. Belief given a body. That's not a scientific answer. No, Gabriel agreed. It's a true one. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. Picard's ready room was softly lit, the stars beyond the viewport crawling past at a leisurely sublight crawl, while the Enterprise held position to complete its scans of the anomaly site. Picard sat with his hands folded on the desk, Counselor Troi in the chair beside him, and across from them both Gabriel, no longer under direct guard, though Worf remained stationed just outside the door, close enough to intervene in half a second if it came to that. Dr. Crusher's examination, Picard began, raised more questions than it answered. Story of my life, Captain. Gabriel's grin was easy, but Troi, watching him with a quiet attentiveness that was the core of her gift, felt something else moving beneath it. Something old and carefully managed, like a wound that had long since scarred over, but never quite stopped aching. She used the word grace, Picard continued. A theological term. I confess I did not expect to hear it in a medical report. Yeah, well, Gabriel spread his hands. Turns out theology's not always just a nice story people tell each other to feel better about dying. Sometimes it's a physics department nobody bothered to publish. Troi leaned forward slightly. You said you were fleeing a family reunion. I sense that isn't an exaggeration or a metaphor. There's real grief in you when you say it. Real fear even, though you're working very hard not to show that. Gabriel's smile faltered, just slightly, just for a moment. Enough that Picard caught it too. Counselor, was it? You're good. He exhaled, and for the first time since arriving, something like exhaustion crept into his voice. Here's the short version, and I promise it's true even though it's going to sound insane. Where I come from, there's a war. Has been on and off for longer than your species has existed. Two sides, call them heaven and hell if you want the easy shorthand. Locked in something that stopped being about anything except itself a long, long time ago. I'm what you'd call an angel. One of the older ones. And I got tired. Tired of picking sides, tired of watching things I loved get used as chess pieces, tired of being expected to choose between two kinds of monstrous. He looked down at his hands. So I ran, found a door nobody else knew existed, and I went through it. And I ended up here. Didn't plan on here, specifically. Didn't plan much of anything. Honestly, past not there. The ready room was quiet for a long moment. Picard had spent a career encountering civilizations, entities, and phenomena that defied Federation understanding, the Q, the Dowd, beings of pure energy who considered humanity a curious infestation. And he had learned over decades that dismissing the impossible on principle was itself a kind of arrogance. But there was a difference between the merely inexplicable and a claim this vast. "You are asking me to accept," Picard said carefully, "the literal existence of what my species has, for most of its history, categorized as myth. Heaven, hell, angels. I'm not asking you to accept anything, Captain." Gabriel met his eyes, and there was no performance in it now, none of the theatrical charm from the cargo bay. "I'm telling you what's true, because you asked, and because, believe it or not, I'm sick of lying to people to make myself easier to deal with. What you do with it is your business. Believe me, don't believe me. Write me up as a very convincing lunatic. I've been called worse by better." Troy's expression had gone thoughtful, weighing something. "Captain, whatever the metaphysics of his claim, his emotional state is genuine. He is not deceiving us about how he feels. Whether the cosmology he's describing is literally true," she hesitated, "I can't say. But he believes it, utterly." Picard sat back, considering. Federation doctrine had no framework for angels. It had, over 2 centuries, developed a careful and hard-won comfort with the idea that godlike was a description of power, not proof of divinity. The Q had taught them that lesson thoroughly enough. Whatever Gabriel was, whatever word he used for it, the question that mattered wasn't theological. It was practical. "Very well," Picard said finally. "Whatever the truth of your origins, you are, for the moment, a guest aboard this vessel, one whose arrival remains unexplained by any means at our disposal, and whose capabilities remain, as yet, undemonstrated. I will extend you provisional latitude. I expect, in turn, honesty and restraint." Restraint. Gabriel's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a wince. "That's actually the hard part, Captain. Restraint's never really been my specialty." But he held up a hand before Picard could respond. "I'll try. For what it's worth, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here because I wanted for once to see what it looked like when people built something without a god looking over their shoulder telling them how to do it. So far." He glanced out at the stars sliding past the viewport, and something almost wistful crossed his face. "Not bad, Captain. Not bad at all." Outside the ready room, unnoticed by any of them, the temperature of local subspace had shifted by a fraction of a degree, the kind of anomaly that would have meant nothing to any instrument in the Alpha Quadrant. Except one, 40 light-years away, in a place that was not a place, something ancient and capricious tilted its head, sensing a flavor of power in the universe that had not been there an hour before, and smiled with an interest that boded very poorly for the quiet evening the Enterprise crew still believed they were having. The senior staff meeting convened at 0800 the following morning, and Picard had chosen the setting deliberately, the observation lounge, not the ready room, because whatever decision came out of the next hour needed to belong to more than just the captain alone. Riker sat to his right, Data beside him with a pad already cued to the previous night's sensor logs. Worf standing rather than sitting, arms crossed, radiating the particular tension of a security chief who had not slept well. Troy occupied her usual seat near the window, and Crusher had brought her own set of findings, printed rather than displayed, as though the strangeness of them demanded something more tangible than a screen. Gabriel was not present. Picard had been deliberate about that too. "Let's begin with what we know," Picard said. "Doctor." Crusher set her pad down. Physiologically, he registers as human at a surface level: skin, musculature, skeletal structure, even a passable simulation of internal organs. But it's a simulation, Jean-Luc. Underneath it, there's something the tricorder can't parse. An energy matrix woven through every cell that behaves less like biology and more like, she searched for the word, architecture. Like his body is a structure he's chosen to occupy, not one he was born into. Compatible with his claim, Troy said quietly. He described himself as an angel, a being of what he called grace. Not born, but made and ancient. I don't sense deception in him when he talks about his nature. I sense exhaustion. Grief he's trying very hard to keep buried under humor. Grief for what? Riker asked. A war, Troy said. One he's been part of for what he describes as longer than recorded human history. He didn't elaborate further, but number one, whatever that conflict cost him, it's not something he's fully processed. There's real trauma there. That concerns me more than his powers do. Data spoke next, precise as always. I have completed analysis of the anomaly that preceded his arrival. I can offer no conventional explanation. The event does not correspond to any subspace phenomenon in Starfleet's database, nor to any wormhole, temporal rift, or dimensional fold previously cataloged. If I am to take Gabriel's account at face value, that he opened, in his words, a door between fundamentally different planes of existence, then the implications extend well beyond this ship. It would suggest the universe contains, or borders, realities operating under entirely different physical and metaphysical laws than our own. Which is either the most significant scientific discovery of the century, Riker said, or the most elaborate delusion we've ever met in person. Or, Worf said darkly, a lie, designed to earn our trust before he strikes. Picard held up a hand before the debate could splinter further. Lieutenant Worf's caution is warranted. We have, as yet, no independent verification of anything Gabriel has told us, only his own account and the physical evidence of his arrival, which confirms only that something extraordinary occurred, not why. I am not prepared to extend him the run of this ship on faith alone. With respect, Captain, Troy said, I'd urge equal caution in the other direction. If his account is true, and my empathic sense says it is, at least from his own perspective, then we are dealing with a being of considerable power who has, by his own admission, walked away from that power's usual purpose. That's not nothing. That's someone actively trying not to be a threat. Trying, Worf repeated unconvinced. He has already demonstrated capabilities beyond our detection or containment. If he chooses violence, Counselor, our shields and phasers may prove irrelevant. Then our best defense, Picard said, is not force. It's understanding and judgment. Mr. Data, has he cooperated fully with every request made of him thus far? Yes, Captain. Fully, and by Dr. Crusher's account, with unusual candor for someone under duress. Picard was quiet for a moment, turning the problem over the way he turned over any first contact scenario, not as a threat to be neutralized, but as an unknown to be understood carefully, without the fatal error of mistaking difference for danger. He had made that mistake before in his career and had watched colleagues make it far more disastrously. He had also seen what happened when caution curdled into paranoia, when an entire civilization's fear of the unfamiliar became a self-fulfilling catastrophe. My judgment, he said finally, is this. We proceed as we would with any new contact whose intentions remain unproven, but whose actions, so far, have been consistent with good faith. Gabriel will be granted limited access to designated areas of the ship under discreet security observation, not the visible guard detail we've maintained thus far, Mr. Worf. I want him to feel he has been extended trust, not merely tolerance. Trust, extended visibly, tends to be repaid in kind. Suspicion, worn openly, tends to become its own justification. Worf's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. Understood, Captain. I will comply. I will also maintain contingency protocols in the event my caution proves warranted. I would expect nothing less, Mr. Worf. A faint, dry warmth touched Picard's expression. Counselor Troy, I want regular assessments of his emotional state, not as surveillance, but as genuine care for a being who, whatever else he is, appears to be in considerable pain. Doctor, continue your research, discreetly. If there is truth to what he's told us about the nature of his existence, it may represent scientific understanding beyond anything the Federation currently possesses. I want that understood properly, not merely cataloged. And if he's lying? Riker asked. If this is a very sophisticated con, and we're about to hand a hostile power the keys to the ship, then we will learn that, number one, and respond accordingly. But I will not begin this relationship from a posture of assumed hostility. That is not who we are. Picard rose, signaling the meeting's end. Bring him to the observation lounge. I believe it's time he heard our terms directly, and time we asked him a few more questions of our own. Gabriel arrived flanked by 2 security officers who peeled away at a nod from Worf, positioning themselves outside the doors rather than within them, a small gesture, but one Gabriel clearly clocked, his eyebrows lifting slightly as he took the seat offered to him at the foot of the table. Well, he said, glancing around at the assembled senior staff. This feels like a jury. Should I be worried? You are not on trial, Gabriel, Picard said, but you are a guest whose presence carries real risk to this ship and crew, whether or not that risk is intentional on your part. I am prepared to extend you provisional trust. In turn, I require honesty, complete honesty, about what you are capable of, and what dangers, if any, your presence here might invite. Something in Gabriel's easy posture shifted, subtle, but Troy caught it immediately. And so, a beat later, did Picard. Not evasion. Recalculation. That's a fair ask, Gabriel said slowly. And I owe you a better answer than I gave last night, because I left something out. Something you're going to want to know before it becomes a problem. He exhaled, and for the first time, the humor drained almost entirely from his voice. The door I came through wasn't quiet. Where I'm from, power doesn't just disappear without somebody noticing the hole it left behind. There's a very good chance something followed the scent I left on my way out. Something a lot more interested in games than I ever was. The room went very still. Define something, Worf said, low and dangerous. Gabriel looked up, and for the first time since his arrival, the joke was entirely gone from his face. Where I come from, we've got our own version of what you'd probably call trickster gods. Beings who play with mortals for sport, who think free will is basically a toy to be rearranged for entertainment. He paused. I used to be one of them, if I'm being honest. Before I got tired of it. His gaze drifted unfocused toward the viewport and the stars beyond. If something followed me here, and I think something might have, you're not going to want to meet it unprepared, Captain. Trust me, I know exactly what it's capable of. As if summoned by the words themselves, the lights in the observation lounge flickered. Once, deliberately, unmistakably not a power fluctuation, and a voice that did not belong to anyone in the room, warm and amused and utterly uninvited, rippled through the air like the punchline to a joke only it found funny. Well, 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 it said. Now this is a party I was not expecting to crash. The temperature in the observation lounge did not change. The air pressure did not change. And yet every human instinct in the room screamed that something had shifted. The way a room feels different the instant a predator enters it, long before any sense can articulate why. Data was on his feet, tricorder already raised, reading nothing. No energy signature, no life sign, no explanation at all for a voice that had come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Captain, I am detecting no source for that transmission. It did not originate from any comm system aboard this vessel. That's because it's not a transmission, Tin Man. The voice sharpened into a shape and light gathered at the head of the table. Not a transporter effect, no shimmer of energy. Simply a man who had not been there a moment ago, and now unmistakably was, sitting in the chair Picard had left empty, boots propped up on the table's polished surface with an air of profound, practiced insolence. He wore civilian clothes cut in a style that belonged to no century Data's databases could immediately place, and his eyes, when he turned them toward the room, held an amusement that felt less like joy and more like appetite. Q, Picard said, and the single syllable carried 2 centuries of accumulated exhaustion. In the flesh. Well. The newcomer glanced down at himself with theatrical consideration. In whatever this is. Mildly insulting, by the way, Jean-Luc, that you've got an actual celestial being sitting 3 seats down, and your face doesn't so much as twitch. But I show up, and you look like you've swallowed a lemon. Gabriel had gone very still, and the stillness itself was more alarming than anything he'd said or done since arriving. His easy posture had vanished entirely, replaced by something coiled and watchful, an old and practiced wariness settling over him like armor. "Q," he repeated, testing the word. "That's a new one. Didn't know you had a franchise out here." "Oh, this is rich." Q's grin widened, delighted, as he swung his boots off the table and leaned forward, studying Gabriel with the frank, hungry curiosity of a collector who had just spotted something rare. "You don't know what I am. Do you have any idea how long it's been since something looked at me and didn't already have an opinion? And here I thought I'd cataloged every flavor of near-omnipotent nuisance this corner of creation had to offer. And then," he spread his hands, "a literal angel falls out of a hole in reality that shouldn't exist, trailing enough raw power to make my continuum sit up and take notice. And nobody thought to introduce us properly." "Q," Picard said, with a particular flatness he reserved for moments he needed very badly to control. "If you are here to cause trouble." "Trouble, Jean-Luc?" Q pressed a hand to his chest, wounded. "I am hurt. I am here out of pure, disinterested scholarly curiosity." His eyes slid back to Gabriel, and the performance thinned just slightly, revealing something colder and more genuinely interested underneath. "Grace. That's what you're made of, isn't it? I can taste it from here, very different flavor from the continuum's power. Older in some ways, younger in others. Tell me, little angel, who exactly do you answer to? Because whatever's up there giving orders, I've never met them, and I like to think I've met everyone worth meeting." "You haven't met my boss," Gabriel said, and there was an edge in his voice now, careful and controlled. "And honestly, kid, you should be grateful for that. He doesn't do introductions. He does endings." "Kid." Q laughed, delighted all over again. "Oh, I love him already, Jean-Luc. Can we keep him?" Riker had positioned himself, almost without conscious thought, slightly forward of Troy's chair, an old instinct, protective and useless against whatever Q actually was, but present all the same. "With respect," Riker said, "this is a Federation vessel, not a stage for whatever this is." "Everywhere is a stage, Commander. You've simply been performing on a very small one." Q waved a dismissive hand, then returned his full attention to Gabriel with the singular focus of a man who had found, for the first time in longer than the Enterprise crew could imagine, something genuinely unfamiliar. "So, angel, grace, a door between realities that my continuum, in all our considerable and frankly unmatched dominion over this little corner of everything, did not create and cannot fully explain. That is either a very impressive trick, or it means my understanding of the fundamental architecture of existence has a rather embarrassing gap in it. I do not enjoy gaps, little angel. I find them itchy." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Then I get used to the itch because I'm not in the business of handing out cosmology lessons to strangers who think they're the biggest thing in the room." "Oh, but I'm the biggest thing in this room," Q said almost gently, and for just a moment the amusement fell away entirely, replaced by something ancient and vast and entirely without the warmth of a joke. The lights along the observation lounge's edges dimmed, briefly, as if the ship itself had felt the weight of what sat among them. "I have unmade stars for less interesting conversations than this one. I would advise a little more respect." Respect. Gabriel's voice had gone very quiet, very even. The voice, Troy realized with a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, of someone who had faced down things far worse than a bored god and lived to make jokes about it afterward. "I've met your type before, Q, beings who think being old and strong means being owed something. I used to be exactly that kind of arrogant a long, long time ago, before I watched what that arrogance actually cost the people underneath it. So here's some free advice, since you seem so hungry for something new. Threatening this ship, or this crew, or anyone on it, is the fastest way I know to find out I'm a lot less fun than I look." Silence stretched across the observation lounge, taut and dangerous. Two vastly unequal and vastly incomprehensible powers regarding each other across a Starfleet conference table, while 7 mortal officers sat caught in the gravity between them, entirely unable to influence whatever happened next. Then Q laughed, a real laugh this time, delighted and surprised, the tension breaking like a held breath released. "Oh, I like you. I like you enormously. Jean-Luc, You simply must let me keep him around for a while. It's been an absolute age since anyone talked to me like that and meant it. Q, Picard said, seizing the opening with the practiced patience of a man who had learned, across years of exhausting encounters, exactly how to manage this particular brand of chaos. If your interest in Gabriel is genuine curiosity rather than provocation, I would ask that you conduct it without endangering my ship or crew. Endangering. Q rolled his eyes with theatrical exaggeration. Please. I'm merely observing. For now. His gaze slid back to Gabriel, sharp and evaluating, the amusement never fully leaving, but something more calculating settling beneath it. But do be careful, little angel. You said something followed you through that door of yours. Oh, don't look so surprised. I heard everything. Eavesdropping is one of the few genuine pleasures left to a being of my considerable and largely unchallenged capabilities. If your friends from home come looking, and they bring even a fraction of the mess you're clearly running from, I may find myself rather more invested in this little ship's fate than even I intended. Wars have a way of spilling. Then maybe, Gabriel said low and steady, you should help me make sure that door stays shut behind me, instead of poking at it to see what falls out. Q considered this, head tilted, an expression crossing his face that might, on anyone else, have passed for genuine thought. Perhaps, he said finally, or perhaps I'll simply watch and see which is more entertaining. He rose from the chair in one fluid motion, straightening his civilian jacket with theatrical care. Until next time, Jean-Luc, Angel. He inclined his head toward Gabriel with something that, for Q, passed as respect. Do try not to die. It would be terribly disappointing after such a promising introduction. And then he was gone. No flash of light, no transporter shimmer, simply an absence where a presence had been. The air in the observation lounge settling back into ordinary stillness, as if nothing at all had happened. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Riker exhaled, low and rough. Somebody want to explain what in God's name that was? Gabriel let out a breath that sounded, for the first time since his arrival, genuinely unsteady. That, he said quietly, was a being who spent so long being the most powerful thing in every room he's ever walked into that he's forgotten what it costs everyone else when he gets bored. I've met a few things like him. Never anything quite that strong, though. He looked up, and something grim had settled behind his eyes. Captain, I need you to understand something. If he's telling the truth about tasting power from home on the wind, if something actually did follow me through that door, then whatever's coming isn't going to care about your uniforms, your protocols, or your prime directive. And now you've got two separate near-omnipotent entities taking an interest in this ship instead of one. Picard's expression had gone carefully, deliberately calm, the calm of a man doing rapid arithmetic on a problem with no good outcomes yet visible. Then I suggest, he said, we determine exactly what, or who, might be following you, before it arrives to introduce itself. 10 forward was quieter than usual for the mid-shift hour, most of its regular patrons having drifted off after the yellow alert had finally stood down, but Guinan remained behind the bar, as she always did, polishing glasses that didn't need polishing, watching the room with the particular attentiveness of someone who had lived long enough to recognize when the universe was tilting slightly off its axis. She had felt at the moment Gabriel came through whatever door he'd come through, a ripple across senses she rarely spoke of, older instincts honed across centuries that most of the crew assumed were simply intuition. She had not gone to the observation lounge. She had not needed to. She had simply waited. Because, in her considerable experience, the things worth understanding eventually found their way to a quiet bar, given time. Gabriel found his way there at 2,300 hours, alone, having politely but firmly declined Worf's offer of a continued security escort now that the captain had extended him provisional freedom aboard the ship. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, and Guinan set a glass in front of him without being asked. Something amber and faintly luminous, one of the many synthahol blends only she seemed to know the true composition of. You're not going to card me, Gabriel said, half a question. I don't think age is really the issue with you. Guinan studied him with an expression that held none of the wariness the rest of the crew had shown, only a calm, evaluating curiosity. You've been carrying something heavy since you walked through that door. I've tended enough bars in enough places to recognize the look. Gabriel turned the glass slowly between his fingers, not drinking. "You're not human," he said. It wasn't a question either. "No." Guinan smiled, faint and knowing. "And you're not the first thing I've met that wasn't from around here, if that's what you're wondering. Won't be the last, either, probably. I have a sense for these things. Comes with a very long life and an unfortunate habit of ending up wherever the universe decides to get interesting." "Yeah, well." Gabriel finally took a sip, grimacing slightly at whatever memory the taste stirred. "Interesting's usually a polite word for catastrophic, where I'm from." "Tell me about where you're from." It wasn't an order, and it wasn't quite a request either, just an open door, offered without pressure, the kind of invitation that made refusing feel almost rude. Gabriel found himself talking before he'd fully decided to. "Heaven," he said. "Or what heaven's become, anyway. It wasn't always what it is now. There was a time a long time ago, before your species figured out fire, when it actually meant something. Order, purpose, family, even in its own rigid way." His mouth twisted, something bitter and old surfacing beneath the words. "Then my father left. Just walked out on the whole project, no explanation, no goodbye, and left the rest of us to figure out what came next. My brothers didn't handle that well. Michael and Lucifer especially. They turned 4 billion years of grief into the longest, stupidest fight in the history of anything. And everyone else got dragged into picking a side. And you?" "I picked the door." Gabriel's laugh was short and humorless. "Ran. Hid on Earth for a couple thousand years, playing trickster, playing games, telling myself it was better than watching my family tear itself apart over a fight that stopped meaning anything centuries before I was born. And it worked for a while. Until it didn't." He set the glass down, hands very still. "Eventually the war found me anyway. It always does. So I ran again. Farther, this time. Ended up here." Guinan was quiet for a moment, refilling a glass that hadn't needed refilling, giving him space the way she'd learned, across centuries, that grief often required before it would speak its full truth. "You didn't just run from a war," she said finally. "You ran from being expected to be a soldier in it. There's a difference." Something in Gabriel's expression cracked, just slightly. The performance he'd worn since arriving slipping enough to show the exhaustion underneath. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I got tired of being expected to choose. Tired of both sides thinking their monstrous version of the truth was worth more than actual people caught in the middle. I've watched good things, good people, good angels, get chewed up and spat out by a fight that was never really about them. I didn't want to be part of the machine anymore. Didn't want to be the trickster either, honestly. Just wanted," he stopped, searching for words that didn't come easily. "I don't even know. Something quieter. Something that wasn't about power." "And instead you found Q," Guinan said dryly, "and a Federation starship, and possibly whatever's chasing you through the hole you left behind. Not exactly the quiet life." "No." Gabriel managed something that was almost a real smile. "Story of my life, I guess. Universe's got a sense of humor. Bad one, but persistent." "For what it's worth," Guinan said, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping into something more serious, "this crew is better than most at handling things that don't fit their instruction manuals. Picard especially. He's faced down gods before, the arrogant kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that thought being powerful meant being right. He didn't fold. Whatever's coming for you, Angel, you picked a decent ship to wash up on." "That obvious, huh? That something's coming." "You've got the look of a man checking exits," Guinan said simply. "Even sitting still, even talking, some part of you never stops watching the door. That's not paranoia. That's experience." Gabriel didn't answer immediately, and in the quiet that followed, the low hum of the ship's systems seemed suddenly louder, more present. The Enterprise carrying its crew steadily forward through space, unaware, most of it, of exactly how much danger might be trailing in its wake. "There's something I didn't tell the captain," Gabriel said finally, voice low. "Not the whole truth, anyway. It's not just my family that might come looking. There's a specific one. Older than me, meaner than Michael and Lucifer put together. And it doesn't share the family's usual restraint about collateral damage." He looked up, and something genuinely frightened flickered behind the easy trickster mask for just a moment. If it followed the scent I left through that door, this ship's got maybe days before something shows up that makes Q look like a mildly annoying houseguest. Guinan's expression didn't change, but something in her stillness sharpened, attentive in a way that suggested she was recalculating the shape of the coming days. Then I'd suggest, she said quietly, you finish telling Picard the truth. All of it, before it stops being your choice to make. Across the room, unnoticed by either of them, the ambient lighting flickered once, barely perceptible, easily dismissed as a power fluctuation by anyone not already primed to notice such things. Gabriel noticed. His hand tightened, almost imperceptibly, around the glass. Yeah, he said softly, more to himself than to Guinan. I think that clock's running faster than I'd like. By 0900 the following morning, Picard had convened a second, smaller meeting. Himself, Riker, Troy, and Gabriel, in the ready room this time, the setting deliberately more intimate than the observation lounge's Council of War atmosphere. Guinan had sent word through Troy overnight, a quiet suggestion that the captain hear the rest of what Gabriel hadn't yet said, and Picard had taken the hint with the seriousness it deserved. You told us something followed you, Picard said without preamble, once the doors had sealed. Guinan indicates there's more to that warning than you shared yesterday. I would like the complete truth now, Gabriel, not the version calibrated to keep me calm. Gabriel, seated across the desk, looked older in the morning light than he had the night before. Not physically, his borrowed face hadn't changed, but something in his posture had shifted, the last of the performance finally burning away. Fair, he said. You've earned the whole story, and honestly, keeping half of it back was probably a mistake. Habit. Old habit. The less people know, the less they can use against you, or against the people you're trying to protect. Doesn't really apply here, though. Not if I want you all to survive what might be coming. Then start, Riker said, not unkindly, but with the flat directness of a man tired of half-truths. Gabriel nodded. Heaven's got a hierarchy. Always has. Archangels at the top. That's me, for what it's worth. 1 of 4, though top is generous considering how thoroughly Michael and Lucifer's fight burned through everything else that used to matter up there. Below us, legions of ordinary angels, most of them soldiers, first, and anything else a distant second. It's not a gentle place. Never was, not really, not since my father left and stopped bothering to referee. And what followed you, Troy said gently, isn't Michael. Or Lucifer. No. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Those two, for all their damage, at least fight for something they believe in, twisted as it's become. What's coming, if it's coming, and I think it is, doesn't believe in anything except its own amusement. There's a category of my kin that never fit neatly into either side of the war. Beings who found the whole conflict tedious, who preferred games to armies, chaos to conquest. I used to run with that crowd, actually, back when I still called myself a trickster instead of an archangel in hiding. Difference is, I got out. Grew something like a conscience along the way. Some of the others never did. You're describing, Data said, having joined partway through via the Ready Room's comm panel, quietly monitoring from the bridge, an entity that shares your species and capabilities but lacks whatever ethical constraint you have developed. That's the polite version, yeah. Gabriel's mouth twisted. The less polite version is that if it's the one I think it is, an old acquaintance, we'll call it, from back when I still ran with that crowd. It doesn't just play games with mortals. It considers entire timelines disposable, entire species a punchline. It's smart, patient, and it's very, very good at making itself look harmless right up until it isn't. How would we recognize it, Picard asked, if it arrived? That's the problem. Gabriel spread his hands, frustrated. It won't announce itself with a light show like Q did. It'll blend in, wear a face that makes people comfortable, say things that sound reasonable, and by the time anyone realizes something's wrong, it'll already have 3 or 4 moves in motion that nobody saw coming. It thrives on being underestimated. I should know. I taught it half its tricks once upon a time, before I decided I didn't want to be that anymore. Riker leaned forward. Then give us something concrete. A name, a pattern, anything that would let security actually watch for it. Gabriel hesitated. A long pause. Waited with something that looked almost like shame. Loki, he said finally. That's the name it's worn longest. the one it's proudest of, though it's borrowed plenty of others across plenty of worlds. If it's here, it won't be calling itself that. But watch for anyone who seems to know things they shouldn't, who nudges conversations in directions that only make sense in hindsight, who seems to be enjoying themselves a little too much regardless of what's actually happening around them. That's the tell. Everything's a joke to it. Everything's a game with pieces it gets to move. Picard absorbed this, his expression carefully neutral, though the weight of the warning had visibly settled over the room. And if this Loki does arrive, what does it want? What is the game specifically? Chaos, mostly for its own sake. Gabriel's voice had gone quiet, almost pained. But it also might genuinely want me back. Not out of any love lost. Trust me, there isn't any. But because a runaway archangel loose in an entirely new reality. One with technology and civilizations it's never had the chance to play with before, is exactly the kind of opportunity something like it doesn't pass up. It'll see this ship, this crew, this whole quadrant, as a board it's never played on. And I'll be the excuse it uses to start moving pieces. Troy's expression had grown troubled, the empathic weight of Gabriel's, fear pressing against her own careful composure. You believe you're responsible for endangering this ship, she said. Not just worried about a threat. You feel guilty for bringing it here. Wouldn't you? Gabriel's laugh was bitter and short. I ran to get away from a war, counselor, and there's a real chance I just dragged a piece of it through the door behind me. That's not exactly a great follow-up to thanks for not shooting me on sight. Picard rose, moving to the viewport, considering the star field beyond with the measured stillness that had carried him through decades of impossible decisions. Gabriel, he said finally, I have led this crew through encounters with entities of considerable power and considerably worse intentions than anything you've yet demonstrated. I do not hold you responsible for a war you did not start, nor for an enemy who may or may not have followed you here through no clear fault of your own. What I do require going forward is exactly what you've given us this morning, full disclosure, however uncomfortable, so that this crew can prepare rather than be caught unaware. I can do that, Gabriel said, something in his posture easing fractionally, as if he'd been braced for a very different response. I can absolutely do that. Good. Picard turned back to face him. Then let us begin preparing. Mr. Data, I want a full briefing prepared for the senior staff and discreetly ship security, behavioral patterns consistent with what Gabriel has described, without triggering unnecessary alarm among the general crew. Counselor, continue monitoring Gabriel's well-being, but also, if you're able, extend your empathic awareness more broadly. If this Loki is as skilled at deception as described, unusual emotional patterns among the crew may be our earliest warning. Understood, Captain, Troy said. And Gabriel. Picard's gaze settled on him, level and unflinching. If this entity does arrive, I want your full cooperation, and your full power, if it comes to that. Whatever restraint you've shown thus far, I suspect this may not be the moment for it. Gabriel met his eyes, and for the first time since stepping through that door into an unfamiliar cargo bay, something like genuine resolve settled over his features, chasing away the last of the deflecting humor. Yeah, he said quietly. I think you're right about that, Captain. If Loki's coming, I'm done running from this particular fight. Outside, unheard by anyone aboard, the fabric of local space shivered once more, fainter this time, careful, patient, the signature of something that had learned, across countless games played across countless worlds, that the best entrances were the ones nobody saw coming until it was already far too late to matter. Word of Gabriel's true nature had, inevitably, begun to spread through the ship, not through any official announcement, but through the quiet, inexorable channels by which a starship's crew always learned the things officially withheld from them. A security officer's offhand remark in a turbolift, a medical technician who'd assisted with Crusher scans and couldn't quite keep the wonder out of her voice, a rumor passed at breakfast that grew stranger and more elaborate with each retelling. By midday, 10 Forward had become an unofficial forum for a debate the Federation had not seriously entertained in over 2 centuries. Picard became aware of it when Data requested a private consultation, an unusual enough occurrence that the captain cleared his schedule immediately. The android arrived in the ready room with a particular stillness. he wore when a genuine philosophical question had lodged itself somewhere in his positronic matrix and refused to resolve cleanly. "Captain," Data began, "I find myself in an unusual position. Gabriel's account of his origins, if true, and I have found no evidence thus far to suggest otherwise, represents empirical confirmation of concepts humanity has, for most of its recorded history, categorized as unfalsifiable religious belief. I am uncertain how to reconcile this with established scientific understanding, nor with the general Federation position that such matters remain, definitionally, outside the domain of verifiable knowledge." "You're not alone in that uncertainty, Mr. Data," Picard said. "I confess I've spent a fair portion of the last 2 days wrestling with the same question." "May I ask your conclusion, sir?" Picard considered this carefully before answering. "I have encountered entities of vast power before, Data. The Q, certainly, among others. For a time, humanity mistook such beings for gods, and in some ancient sense, perhaps that mistake wasn't entirely unreasonable. Power on that scale, unexplained, has always invited worship. But I do not believe Gabriel's existence validates any particular human religious tradition, precisely. I believe it confirms that the universe is considerably stranger and considerably larger than even the Federation's considerable knowledge has yet mapped. That has always been true. Gabriel is simply the latest, most vivid reminder of it." "A reasonable distinction," Data said. Though something in his tone suggested the philosophical, it remained only partially scratched. "And yet, if beings matching the descriptions of angels exist, in some verifiable sense, does that not lend at least partial credibility to the broader religious frameworks that first described them? I confess the question troubles me in a manner I find difficult to categorize. I do not possess faith, Captain, in the conventional sense. I am uncertain whether that absence now represents a gap in my understanding, or whether faith itself was always simply an early, imperfect attempt to describe phenomena humanity lacked the instruments to properly measure." Picard allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "That, Mr. Data, may be the most human question I've heard you ask in some time." The debate in 10 Forward, meanwhile, had grown considerably less philosophical and considerably more heated. Guinan watched from behind the bar as a cluster of off-duty officers argued in increasingly raised voices. A young science officer named Ensign Aquino, normally soft-spoken, had planted herself at the center of it, face flushed with an intensity that had nothing to do with the 2 drinks she'd had. "I'm just saying," she pressed, to a lieutenant from Stellar Cartography who looked increasingly uncomfortable with how personal the conversation had become. "My grandmother believed in this stuff, actual angels, actual heaven, for her entire life, and everyone always treated it like a quaint anachronism, something people used to believe before we knew better. And now there's a literal one drinking replicated coffee down the corridor, and suddenly it's just a science problem, a first contact scenario, like he's some new species we catalog and move on from." "It's not that simple, and you know it," the lieutenant said. "One being showing up doesn't confirm an entire religious tradition. Gabriel himself said heaven's basically been a war zone for millennia. That's not exactly the picture your grandmother's faith painted, is it? Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. The Aquino struggled for the word, frustrated. The truth underneath it, that there's something bigger than us, something that cares, or used to, or could. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually, to a lot of people who got told for 200 years that believing in that made you unscientific. Backward." Guinan set down the glass she'd been polishing and moved closer, drawn by the particular rawness in the young officer's voice, not academic curiosity, but something that had clearly been carried, quietly, for a long time. "Can I offer something?" she asked, and the small cluster of officers turned toward her with the instinctive respect the whole crew extended to her without quite knowing why. "Please," Aquino said. "I've lived a long time," Guinan said. "Long enough to have met beings that some species called gods, and watched those same beings turn out to be flawed, frightened, ordinary in all the ways that matter, once you got past the power. I've also met beings with no power at all who understood the universe more truly than anything claiming godhood ever did." She looked around at the small, gathered crowd. "What I'd offer you is this. Gabriel being real doesn't make your grandmother's faith more or less true than it was the day before he arrived. It confirms that something exists behind the word angel. It doesn't confirm what that something means, or whether it deserves worship, or whether the universe has any grand design behind it at all. Gabriel himself doesn't seem to think it does, from what I understand. He seems like someone who's spent a long time disappointed by the answers he already has. That's not exactly comforting, the lieutenant muttered. It's not meant to be comforting, Guinan said gently. It's meant to be honest. The universe rarely offers the tidy answers people go looking for. But that doesn't mean the search wasn't worth something, all on its own. Aquino was quiet for a long moment, turning her glass slowly between her hands. I think, she said finally, I'd like to actually talk to him. If he'll let me. Not about theology, necessarily. Just what it's like, being what he is. I imagine, Guinan said, with a small, knowing smile, he'd find that a good deal more interesting than being cross-examined by senior staff. Gabriel himself had spent the day largely alone, wandering the ship's public corridors under Worf's now discreet observation, absorbing the strange, orderly peace of a civilization that had built itself without any angel's guidance, any god's design. He found himself, by late afternoon, in one of the ship's smaller observation galleries, watching the stars crawl past in dignified silence, when the door chimed behind him. Ensign Aquino, he said, without turning around, some old instinct cataloging the newcomer before she'd said a word. Word travels fast on this ship. Sorry, I can come back. No. He turned, and something in his expression had softened from the careful wariness he'd worn through most of his official meetings. No, it's fine. Honestly, kind of a relief, talking to someone who isn't trying to figure out if I'm a security threat. Aquino stepped closer, hesitant, clearly working up to a question she'd been carrying since 10 forward. Can I ask you something? Something real, not theology exactly. Just, do you think it means anything? That you're here? That any of this happened? Gabriel considered the question longer than she expected, gazing back out at the stars. Honestly, he said finally, I've spent most of my existence not knowing the answer to that, kid. My father built the whole thing and then walked out without explaining why. If there's a grand design behind any of it, he never bothered sharing it with the rest of us. He glanced at her, something gentler than his usual, deflecting humor in his eyes. But I'll tell you what I do think means something. This ship, this crew, the fact that you built something worth believing in without needing a god to hand it to you. That's not nothing. That might honestly be more impressive than anything heaven ever managed. Aquino didn't answer immediately, but something in her expression eased, settled, as though she'd been given not the answer she'd expected, but one she could actually carry. Neither of them noticed the faint, deliberate flicker in the gallery's ambient lighting, patient, curious, cataloging the conversation with an interest that had nothing to do with theology and everything to do with opportunity. The USS Enterprise D rendezvoused with a small Ferengi trading vessel, the Marauder-class Golden Margin, on the edge of Federation space 2 days after Q's visit, a scheduled exchange, arranged weeks earlier. For shipment of rare dilithium, regulators the ship's engineering department had been anticipating for a routine systems upgrade. It was meant to be the least eventful item on Picard's agenda that week. Daimon Grath had other ideas the moment he laid eyes on Gabriel. The Ferengi trader had come aboard personally to oversee the exchange, unusual, but not unheard of, particularly when a deal involved goods the Daimon considered valuable enough to negotiate face-to-face. He was midway through an animated haggling session with Commander Riker over delivery terms when his gaze drifted past the commander's shoulder and landed on the unremarkable-looking human standing near the cargo bay's far wall, chatting amiably with Ensign Aquino about, of all things, the relative merits of replicated versus synthesized coffee. Grath's haggling stopped mid-sentence. You, he said, abandoning Riker entirely and crossing the cargo bay with the quick, acquisitive stride of a man who had just spotted Prophet walking upright. You're the one. The energy anomaly. My sensors picked up the readings from your arrival 3 systems away. Do you have any idea what a signature like that is worth on the right exchange? Gabriel raised an eyebrow, mildly amused despite himself. Depends who's asking and what they think they're buying. Grath. Daimon of the golden margin, and a businessman of considerable, he paused, eyes flicking over Gabriel with an appraising hunger that made Riker's jaw tighten. Considerable vision. My associates, an ideal and rare commodities. Exotic technologies. Unusual biological specimens. And you, my friend, register as something my scanners have never once encountered in 43 years of trading across 6 sectors. I'm not a commodity, pal, Gabriel said, still pleasant, though something sharper had entered his tone. Of course not, of course not. Grath's smile widened, undeterred, the particular relentless optimism of a Ferengi who had scented profit and would not be easily redirected. But surely a being of your evident capabilities has needs, resources, perhaps information you'd find valuable, in exchange for a small demonstration, a sample, say, of whatever remarkable energy you're carrying. My associates back home would pay handsomely. Handsomely enough to make it worth your while too, of course. Everyone profits. That's the beauty of good business. He is not for sale, Daimon, Worf said, stepping forward with the low growl he reserved for conversations he considered already finished. Nor is he a specimen. This negotiation concerns dilithium regulators. Nothing else. Grath, entirely unbothered by the size or evident hostility of the Klingon looming over him, spread his hands in a gesture of wounded innocence that fooled precisely no one. I meant no offense, Lieutenant, merely exploring the full range of possible business between our peoples. Federation officers are so rigid, sometimes about opportunity. It's fine, Worf, Gabriel said, waving a hand. Something mischievous creeping into his expression that Riker, watching closely, recognized with a small flicker of alarm as distinctly familiar to anyone who'd read Q's file. Let the man make his pitch. I'm curious how far he thinks this is going to go. Grath brightened immediately, mistaking curiosity for opening. Excellent. Excellent. A being of reason. I knew at the moment I saw you. Now perhaps we could discuss terms privately? I have a proposal that I believe you'll find. Tell you what, Gabriel interrupted, folding his arms, an unmistakable glint of trouble in his eyes that Aquino, standing nearby, had already learned to recognize from 2 days of conversation. How about I give you a demonstration? Free of charge. Consider it a professional courtesy. That's very generous. Don't thank me yet. What happened next unfolded too quickly for Riker to intervene, though in fairness, there was very little intervention could have accomplished. Grath's ornate financial ledger, a pad-like device he carried everywhere containing, by his own boastful account, the complete and meticulously tracked record of every profitable transaction of his career, began quite suddenly to display something other than latinum totals. Every entry, every carefully hoarded record of profit margins and favorable trades, rearranged itself before the Daimon's horrified eyes into a single looping message. Asterisk, all proceeds donated to Federation Children's Relief Fund. Thank you for your generosity. Asterisk. What? Grath's voice climbed several octaves as he frantically tapped at the device, which cheerfully refused to respond to any input except displaying the message in progressively larger and more colorful fonts. What have you done? That's 43 years of records. That's my entire. Relax, Gabriel said, grinning now, fully himself again in a way that suggested this was, on some level, exactly the kind of small chaos he'd missed. It's an illusion. Your actual records are fine. I just wanted to see how fast you'd panic. Grath stared at him, the ledger's screen flickering back to its normal display as abruptly as it had changed, profit totals intact. And for a moment the Daimon looked genuinely uncertain whether to be furious or deeply impressed. That, he said slowly, was either the cruelest thing anyone has ever done to me, or the single most valuable demonstration I have witnessed in my career. I need to know how you did that. I need to know what else you can do. Name your price, anything within reason, and I assure you my definition of reason is considerably more flexible than most. See, that's the problem, Gabriel said, stepping closer, the humor still present but something firmer underneath it now. You're thinking about this all wrong. You saw something you can't explain, and your first thought was, how do I own a piece of it? That's not a business philosophy, pal. That's a character flaw. In my culture, Grath said with wounded dignity, we call that ambition. Sure you do. Gabriel's expression sobered slightly, and something older moved behind his eyes, the weight of watching across millennia. Exactly what greed unchecked eventually cost the people caught beneath it. Look, I'm not going to lecture you about the rules of acquisition, or whatever holy book you people actually follow. But I'll tell you this for free, no illusions attached. Whatever power you think you could extract from something like me, it's not a resource. It's not a commodity. It's not something that gets safer or more profitable the more of it you try to grab. I've watched things smarter and hungrier than you try that exact play, Daimon. None of them walked away happy. Grath, for the first time since boarding, looked genuinely uncertain, the calculating gleam in his eyes dimming into something closer to caution. A warning, then, freely given. Consider professional courtesy, Gabriel said. One trickster to another. I like you, actually, you've got hustle. I'd hate to see hustle get you killed by something way out of your weight class. Riker cleared his throat, seizing the moment to steer the exchange back toward something resembling normal Starfleet business. Daimon Grath, the dilithium regulators. Shall we finalize terms? Grath tore his gaze away from Gabriel with visible effort, some old instinct clearly still calculating angles, even through his unease, and turned back to Riker with a considerably more subdued version of his earlier enthusiasm. Yes, of course. Standard terms, Commander. I believe we had settled on a fair exchange rate before I was appropriately distracted. The negotiation concluded within the hour. The regulators transferred, the golden margin preparing to break formation and continue on its trade route. But as Grath made his way back toward the docking port, he paused once more beside Gabriel, lowering his voice to something almost genuinely respectful. For what it's worth, the Daimon said, that was the single most humbling business encounter of my career. I don't know what you are precisely, but I've traded with enough dangerous things to recognize when I've been shown mercy rather than force. I won't forget it. Gabriel inclined his head, something almost warm in his expression. Do yourself a favor. Next time something shows up that you can't explain, try curiosity before profit. Might save you some trouble down the line. After the golden margin had disengaged and slipped back into warp, Riker found Gabriel still standing near the docking port, watching the point in space where the trading vessel had vanished. You could have just said no, Riker observed. Would have been simpler. Simpler, sure. Gabriel shrugged, though something more thoughtful lingered beneath the casual gesture. But you know what I've learned, watching my own family tear itself apart for millennia? Sometimes the scariest thing you can do to someone who thinks power is just a resource to be extracted isn't punishment. It's mercy they didn't expect. It makes them actually think, instead of just getting angrier. He glanced at Riker, something rueful in his expression. Old habit. Guess I'm still a trickster at heart, even trying to be something better. Old dog, new tricks. Turns out it's harder than it sounds. Riker studied him for a long moment, recalibrating something in his own assessment of the being who'd fallen out of nowhere into their cargo bay 4 days earlier. For what it's worth, he said finally, echoing Grath's own words without quite realizing it. That was well handled. High praise, Commander. Gabriel's grin returned, easier now. I'll take it. Neither of them noticed, in the quiet aftermath of the golden margin's departure, the faint and deliberate shimmer that rippled briefly across the docking port's outer sensors. Gone before any instrument could register it, patient and unhurried, content for now simply to watch, and wait, and choose its moment. The distress call came through at 0347 hours ship's time, jarring the bridge crew from the low hum of gamma shift into sudden, sharp alertness. Lieutenant Commander Data, who had the con, was already reconfiguring the main view screen before the duty officer finished relaying the message. Captain to the bridge, he said into the comm, voice even despite the urgency. We are receiving an automated distress signal from a Federation research outpost, Outpost Delta Sigma 4, a xenobiology station studying a nearby debris field. Signal indicates hull breach and life support failure across multiple sections. Picard arrived within minutes, uniform hastily fastened, Riker close behind him. Casualties. The station reports 12 personnel aboard, Data said. Current life sign readings indicate 7 remaining, 3 of those in critical condition. The cause of the breach is not specified in the automated message, merely the fact of it. Set a course, maximum warp, Picard ordered, settling into his chair. Yellow alert. Mr. Worf, ready and away team, and medical response the moment we arrive. The Enterprise reached Delta Sigma 4 in 11 minutes, dropping out of warp to a view that told its own grim story before any scan could confirm it. The station's outer ring scarred by what looked, even from a distance, like deliberate structural sabotage rather than accident. Entire sections venting atmosphere into the vacuum in slow, glittering plumes. Sabotage, Worf confirmed grimly, reading the sensor data. Explosive charges placed at structural junctions. This was not an accident, Captain. Life signs. Picard asked. 6 now, data said quietly. 1 critical casualty since the initial signal. Picard's jaw tightened. Away team, prepare to beam over immediately. Dr. Crusher, medical team standing by. Mr. Worf, you'll lead security. Gabriel, who had been quietly present on the bridge during a routine visit to observe operations, a courtesy Picard had begun extending as trust between them deepened, stepped forward before the away team could assemble fully. I'm coming too. Picard hesitated only a moment. Very well. But Gabriel, restraint. Whatever we find over there, this remains a Starfleet operation. Wouldn't dream of stepping on your toes, Captain, Gabriel said, though something tight had entered his voice. Some old instinct sharpening at the scent of violence and dying people. But if there's someone over there hurting your people, I'd like the chance to help stop it. The transporter deposited the away team into chaos. Emergency lighting flickered across a corridor half collapsed from the earlier explosions. Atmosphere thin enough that Crusher's medical tricorder immediately flagged dangerous oxygen levels. And the acrid smell of burned insulation hung heavy in air that hissed audibly through a dozen small hull breaches Worf's team was already working to seal. This way, Crusher called, following the strongest remaining life sign cluster toward what had once been the station's primary laboratory, now a wreck of shattered equipment and scorched bulkheads. They found the survivors huddled in a sealed section near the lab's rear, 4 researchers, terrified but stable, tending to 2 more who lay unmoving on the deck. Crusher was at their side within seconds, tricorder scanning rapid diagnostics, while her medical team began stabilizing the worst injuries. What happened here? Worf demanded of the station's ranking survivor, a shaken junior researcher barely holding herself together. He came out of nowhere, she managed. Not through the airlock. Just appeared. Said he wanted to see something we'd found in the debris field, some kind of artifact. And when Dr. Alvarez refused to hand it over, her voice cracked. He just started destroying things, laughing the whole time, like it was funny. Gabriel had gone very still beside Worf, something cold settling over his features. Describe him. Ordinary looking. Brown hair, average height, dressed like nothing in particular, actually, now that I think about it. But his eyes, she shuddered. His eyes were wrong. Like he was watching all of this happen to someone else. Like none of it was real to him. Loki, Gabriel said quietly, the name landing in the wrecked laboratory like a stone dropped into still water. Before Worf could respond, the emergency lighting flickered, deliberately, unmistakably, and a figure resolved out of the shifting shadows near the lab's ruined far wall, exactly as Gabriel had described days earlier. Unremarkable, almost forgettable, except for the eyes, which held an amusement utterly disconnected from the devastation around him. Gabriel. The newcomer's voice was warm, conversational, as though greeting an old friend at a gathering rather than standing amid the wreckage of a station he'd just torn apart. There you are. Do you have any idea how long I've been looking? You really know how to disappear when you put your mind to it. Loki. Gabriel stepped forward, putting himself deliberately between the trickster and the wounded survivors. Every trace of his usual humor gone entirely. You didn't have to do this. These people had nothing to do with our business. Oh, but that's exactly why I did it. Loki's smile widened, delighted, gesturing lazily at the scorched laboratory around them. You always did care too much about the little ones, Gabriel. It's your one truly boring quality. I figured, what's the fastest way to get your attention? In a whole new universe, with a whole new set of toys? Break a few of them, and watch you come running. He tilted his head, studying the Starfleet officers with the same detached curiosity a child might bring to disassembling an insect. And here you are, worked like a charm. Worf raised his phaser, leveling it at the intruder without hesitation. You will surrender or you will be neutralized. Loki's laugh was bright, genuine, utterly unbothered. Oh, that's adorable. Truly. Please, go ahead, Lieutenant, fire away. I'll wait. He spread his arms in open invitation. Worf fired without hesitation, the phaser beam striking Loki dead center and passing through him entirely, dissipating harmlessly against the bulkhead behind, as though he were made of nothing at all. Loki hadn't so much as flinched. Predictable, Loki said almost gently, but I do appreciate the effort. Stand down, Worf, Gabriel said quietly, stepping fully between the Klingon and the intruder now. Conventional weapons aren't going to touch him. This is between me and him. Oh, now that's more like it. Loki's attention sharpened onto Gabriel with genuine, hungry interest, the wrecked laboratory and its terrified survivors momentarily forgotten. I was starting to think you'd gone soft, hiding out with your new little friends. Playing hero. It's beneath you, brother. You used to understand the game. I stopped playing your game a long time ago, Gabriel said, low and steady. And you're going to leave this ship, these people, and this entire universe alone. Or what? Loki's grin sharpened into something colder. You'll smite me? Please. We both know exactly how evenly matched we are, Gabriel. Neither of us can end this quickly, not without leveling half the station and everyone still breathing in it. So the real question isn't whether you can stop me. He glanced deliberately at the wounded survivors, still being tended by Crusher's medical team, and something predatory flickered behind his amused expression. It's how much you're willing to let these mortals pay for the privilege of trying. Gabriel's hands had curled into fists, raw power gathering visibly around him now, the air itself beginning to hum with pressure that made every Starfleet officer present instinctively brace. Crusher, still crouched over her patients, looked up sharply, and Worf tensed, weapon still raised uselessly against a threat it couldn't touch. For one long terrible moment, it looked as though Gabriel might simply unleash everything he had, and from the barely restrained fury radiating off him, everyone present understood it would be enough to end this fight in an instant. It would also unmistakably level the station and everyone still alive inside it. Gabriel's fist slowly, deliberately unclenched. No, he said quietly, more to himself than to Loki, the gathered power visibly receding, banked back down like a fire deliberately smothered. Not here. Not with them caught in the middle. Loki's smile widened, delighted by the restraint, reading it exactly as the weakness he'd hoped to provoke. There it is. There's my brother. Still can't bring yourself to spend a few disposable lives for a clean shot. Can you? Fascinating. After everything, that soft little conscience is still the thing holding you back. He spread his hands, stepping backward into the flickering shadows near the ruined wall. Don't worry. This was never really about them. Consider this a proper introduction to your new friends, and to what happens next now that I know exactly where you've landed. I'll see you soon, Gabriel. This is going to be so much fun. And then he was gone, the emergency lighting steadying, the laboratory falling suddenly, eerily quiet except for the hiss of atmosphere through sealed breaches and the ragged breathing of frightened survivors. Gabriel stood motionless for a long moment, the fury still visible beneath his skin like banked coals, before he turned to Worf, something raw and apologetic in his expression. I'm sorry. I could have ended that. I had the power to end that right there, and I didn't because innocent people would have died alongside him. Worf finished, something unexpected in his voice, not disappointment, but a grudging, warrior's respect. That is not weakness, Gabriel. On my homeworld, we have a word for choosing restraint even when strength would be easier. We do not consider it dishonor. Gabriel looked at him, something in his expression easing slightly at the unexpected understanding. Yeah, he said quietly. Where I'm from, most of my family would call it exactly that. Weakness. Softness. Then your family, Worf said simply, does not understand honor at all. Behind them, Crusher's medical team continued stabilizing the wounded, The immediate crisis passed, but its shadow lingering heavy over the wrecked laboratory. A clear and unmistakable message left behind by something that had just demonstrated, with brutal efficiency, exactly how far it was willing to go to draw Gabriel out. The game, whatever its rules, had well and truly begun. The Enterprise returned to Federation space with the 6 surviving researchers from Delta Sigma, 4 stabilized in sickbay. The shattered station left under automated distress beacon for a full salvage team to properly investigate, and a debrief scheduled for 0800 that no one aboard was looking forward to. Picard convened it in the observation lounge once more, the same room where Gabriel had first laid out the true shape of what might be pursuing him. This time, the mood was considerably graver. 6 wounded, 1 dead, Picard said without preamble, laying the facts on the table with characteristic bluntness. A Federation research station effectively destroyed, and an entity that our weapons cannot touch, demonstrating, quite deliberately, that it is willing to harm innocent people simply to send a message. He turned his gaze to Gabriel, who sat rigid at the foot of the table, guilt written plainly across features that had, for days, worn nothing but easy humor. I want your full assessment, Gabriel. No omissions this time. You'll get it, Gabriel said quietly. I owe you that much and considerably more after what happened out there. He drew a breath, steadying himself. Loki's exactly as dangerous as I warned you he'd be, maybe worse, now that he's had a taste of what this universe offers him. New toys, new mortals to play with, an entire quadrant that's never had to defend itself against something like him before. That makes this whole reality a playground he's not going to walk away from easily. You had the opportunity to stop him, Worf said, not accusingly, simply stating what all of them had witnessed. You chose not to. Because ending it there would have killed everyone else in that room, Gabriel said, something fierce entering his voice. Loki knew that. He was counting on it, counting on me, either holding back and looking weak, or going all in and proving I don't actually care about collateral damage any more than he does. I wasn't going to give him either, not at the cost of 6 innocent lives. Troy, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up gently. For what it's worth, Captain, I don't believe restraint in that moment constituted weakness. I sense considerable inner conflict from Gabriel, but ultimately a very deliberate, very costly choice to protect people he had no obligation to protect. That's not the profile of someone who poses a danger to this crew. Picard absorbed this, fingers steepled, weighing the tactical reality against the ethical one. The difficulty, he said finally, is that Loki has now demonstrated both the will and the capability to harm anyone connected to this ship in order to provoke a confrontation on his terms. That is a threat to every soul aboard the Enterprise, and to any Federation asset he chooses to target in the meantime. I cannot in good conscience treat this as solely Gabriel's burden to bear. Agreed, Riker said, which means we need a plan that doesn't depend entirely on hoping he doesn't come back. Conventional weapons are useless against him, Worf said grimly. I confirmed that myself. Not entirely useless, Data interjected, having spent the return voyage cross-referencing every scrap of data the away team had gathered. While standard phaser fire passed through the entity without effect, I have been analyzing the residual energy signature left behind during his brief manifestation aboard the station. There are trace similarities, faint but measurable, to Gabriel's own physiological readings. If Loki is, as Gabriel describes, fundamentally the same category of being, it stands to reason that whatever theoretical countermeasures might affect Gabriel's own physiology could, in principle, affect Loki's as well. Gabriel looked up sharply. You're talking about finding a way to actually hurt him with Starfleet tech. I am suggesting the possibility warrants investigation, Data said. Dr. Crusher's medical scans of your own physiology, cross-referenced against the anomalous readings gathered during the Delta Sigma 4 incident, may yield insight into whatever vulnerabilities exist within your shared nature, vulnerabilities Loki himself may not expect us to have identified, given his evident confidence in his own invulnerability to conventional means. That's actually not a terrible idea, Gabriel admitted, something calculating entering his expression for the first time since the confrontation. He's arrogant. Always has been. Never thought anyone outside the family could touch him, and honestly, up until now, nobody ever has. If you could find something, anything, that actually registers as a threat to him, that alone might be enough to shift how this whole thing plays out. Then that is our course, Picard said. Dr. Crusher, Mr. Data, full collaborative analysis, priority 1. Gabriel, I want your complete cooperation, including whatever details of your own physiology you've been reluctant to share thus far. If we are to find a way to protect this crew against a threat our weapons cannot touch, half measures will not suffice. You'll have it, Gabriel said. All of it. I'm done holding things back and watching people pay for it. Picard nodded, satisfied, then turned to a harder question, one he'd clearly been weighing since the away team's return. There is a broader concern I must raise. Starfleet Command will require a full report of this incident, an entity capable of destroying a research station, immune to conventional weapons, actively pursuing a being now aboard this vessel. I cannot in good conscience omit that from my report, however sensitive the details. Gabriel's expression tightened, old wariness resurfacing. You think Command's going to want to get involved? I think, Picard said carefully, that Command will, at minimum, want to understand the scope of the threat, and may have their own opinions about how this ship should proceed. I will advocate for continued Federation protection of you, Gabriel, as I believe it to be both the right course and the wisest one. But I would be lying if I told you that decision rests solely with me. Riker's expression had grown troubled through the exchange, some new calculation visibly forming. There's something else, Captain. If Loki's already demonstrated he'll target Federation assets to provoke Gabriel, and if word of this incident spreads, even through official channels, we should assume other interested parties may hear about it too. A being with reality-warping power, currently vulnerable, currently sheltering aboard a single starship. His jaw tightened. That's not just a threat from Loki anymore. That's a strategic asset from certain points of view. And not everyone in this quadrant shares the Federation's scruples about how such assets get acquired. The room fell quiet at the implication, the weight of it settling over everyone present. Picard's expression had gone carefully, deliberately still, the stillness of a man already anticipating precisely the kind of complications Riker had just voiced aloud. Then I suggest, Picard said finally, we move quickly. Dr. Mr. Data, begin your analysis immediately. Mr. Worf, increase security protocols shipwide, and specifically around Gabriel's quarters and movements, discreetly. And number 1, his gaze settled on Riker with grim understanding. Keep a close watch on subspace traffic in this sector. If word of what happened at Delta Sigma 4 is already spreading, I want to know who's listening before they act on it. As the meeting broke, Gabriel lingered behind, watching the assembled officers disperse to their assigned tasks with the brisk, capable efficiency he'd come to genuinely admire over the past several days. Guinan's words came back to him unbidden. You picked a decent ship to wash up on, and for the first time since Loki's appearance in that wrecked laboratory, something like real hope flickered beneath the guilt still weighing on him. Captain, he said, as Picard moved to follow the others out. For what it's worth, thank you for not treating me like a liability to be managed. My own family stopped doing that a long time ago. Picard paused at the door, considering him with the same measured seriousness he extended to any member of his crew facing an impossible burden. Gabriel, he said, in my experience, the measure of a person or an angel is not the danger that follows them. It is what they choose to do about it, and who they choose to protect along the way. Thus far, you have chosen well. I intend to make certain you continue to have that choice. Unbeknownst to either of them, 3 sectors away, a Romulan listening post had just finished decrypting a fragment of Starfleet's preliminary incident report on Delta Sigma 4, flagged, translated, and forwarded within the hour to a Talshir analyst, whose interest, upon reading the words entity immune to conventional weapons and currently aboard the Enterprise, sharpened into something considerably more dangerous than mere curiosity. Commander Sela had built her career on patience, the particular Romulan virtue of watching, waiting, and striking only when the odds had been tilted thoroughly in her favor, and the report now displayed on her console represented exactly the kind of opportunity that patience was designed to recognize. She read it twice before summoning her tactical officer. An entity immune to conventional Starfleet weaponry, she said, without preamble, as the young officer entered her ready room aboard the warbird Devoras, currently sheltering aboard the Federation flagship, responsible for the destruction of an entire research outpost, according to this intercepted report, though the Federation's own officers appear uncertain whether the entity itself or some rival of its own kind caused the damage. She looked up, dark eyes sharp with calculation. Tell me, Centurion, when was the last time an opportunity of this magnitude presented itself? You intend to acquire it, the Centurion said. Not a question. I intend to understand it, Sela corrected, though the distinction was thin enough to mean very little in practice. A being capable of shrugging off phaser fire, of manifesting and vanishing at will, currently housed aboard a single vulnerable vessel rather than secured within some hardened Federation research facility. If even a fraction of this report is accurate, such a being represents a strategic asset beyond anything currently held by either the Federation or the Empire. The Tal Shiar would be derelict in their duty not to investigate. And if the Federation resists, Sela's smile was thin and cold. Then we shall have to be considerably more persuasive than we were prepared to be. Set a course for the Enterprise's projected position. Quietly, Centurion. I have no interest in announcing our intentions before we've had the chance to properly assess them. Aboard the Enterprise, 3 days into Crusher and Data's collaborative research into Gabriel's physiology, the first sign of Romulan interest arrived not as a warbird decloaking off the bow, but as something considerably subtler, a modified long-range sensor sweep, disguised within the normal background noise of subspace traffic, that Lieutenant Worf's security team nearly missed entirely. Captain, Worf reported, summoning Picard to the bridge with a particular urgency reserved for genuine tactical concerns. We have detected an anomalous sensor pattern consistent with Romulan long-range scanning technology. It has been sweeping this sector intermittently for the past 6 hours. Source. Picard asked, settling into his chair with the immediate focus of a man recalibrating an already complicated week. Undetermined precisely, though the pattern suggests a vessel currently cloaked, likely within 2 light years of our position. Worf's expression had darkened considerably. Captain, the scan frequency is specifically tuned to detect the kind of energy signature Gabriel's physiology produces. This is not routine reconnaissance. Someone is looking for him specifically. Picard's jaw tightened. Then it would seem, he said grimly, our concerns about wider interest were justified rather more quickly than I'd hoped. He turned to Data. Can we determine how the Romulans obtained this information? Regrettably, yes, Captain, Data said. Analysis of subspace communication logs indicates our own incident report regarding Delta Sigma 4 was intercepted and decrypted approximately 31 hours after transmission. Romulan decryption capabilities have historically been underestimated by Starfleet intelligence. This would not be the first instance of a security assumption proving overly optimistic. Wonderful, Riker muttered from his chair. So they know exactly what we've got and roughly where to find it. Gabriel, who had been summoned to the bridge the moment the sensor anomaly was confirmed, listened to the exchange with a grim, resigned expression that suggested this particular complication, while unwelcome, was hardly a surprise to him. Yeah, he said quietly. That tracks. Power like mine doesn't stay quiet for long, no matter what universe I land in. Somebody always wants a piece of it. The question, Picard said, is what we intend to do about it. Lieutenant Worf, I want continuous monitoring of that cloaked vessel's position, and full tactical readiness should it choose to decloak with hostile intent. Already in progress, Captain. Counselor Troy, contact Starfleet Command through our most secure channel. I want them aware of this development immediately, and I want their guidance on how they wish us to proceed diplomatically, should the Romulans attempt direct contact. Aye, sir. Picard's gaze settled finally on Gabriel, weighing the situation with the particular gravity he reserved for moments where diplomacy and genuine danger sat uncomfortably close together. Gabriel, if the Romulans do make contact, and I suspect, given the resources they appear to be committing, that they will, I would ask that you allow this ship's officers to manage that conversation. Whatever their intentions, direct confrontation on your part is likely to escalate rather than resolve the situation. Understood, Captain. Gabriel's expression had gone tight, controlled. For what it's worth, I've dealt with plenty of species across plenty of worlds who wanted to use me for something. I know how to keep my temper in check when it actually matters. The confirmation, when it came, arrived less than 4 hours later. The cloaked vessel decloaking with theatrical suddenness directly off the Enterprise's starboard bow, a Romulan warbird's distinctive silhouette resolving out of empty space, as its running lights flared to visibility. Weapon systems, according to Worf's immediate tactical readout, powered but not yet targeted. Hail from the warbird, Captain. The communications officer reported. On screen, Commander Sila's face resolved on the view screen, composed, faintly amused, radiating the particular confidence of someone who believed she held every advantage in the coming conversation. Captain Picard, how gracious of you to make yourself so easy to find. Commander Sila. Picard's tone remained carefully neutral, betraying none of the tension gripping the bridge. To what do we owe the pleasure of the Empire's attention? Come now, Captain. Let's dispense with the pleasantries. Sila's smile sharpened. We are both aware of what, or rather, who, you're currently sheltering aboard your vessel. The Empire has a considerable interest in understanding such a remarkable entity more thoroughly. I am prepared to offer generous terms for cooperative study. A joint research initiative, perhaps, conducted with full transparency and appropriate safeguards for all involved parties. The being you're referring to, Picard said evenly, is not a specimen to be studied, nor a resource to be negotiated over, Commander. He is a guest of this vessel, extended the same protections and autonomy any sentient being would receive under Federation law. How touchingly principled. Sila's amusement didn't waver. And yet, Captain, principles have a way of becoming considerably more flexible when circumstances demand it. I would remind you that my vessel currently sits within striking range of the Enterprise, fully armed, and that the Empire's patience for diplomatic refusals tends to run considerably shorter than Starfleet's fondness for delivering them. Her gaze sharpened, something colder entering her expression. I am extending you the courtesy of a peaceful resolution, Captain. I would strongly advise you consider it before I'm forced to explore less courteous alternatives. Gabriel, standing quietly near the ready room doors, felt something cold and familiar settle over him. The particular weariness of a being who had spent millennia watching mortals threaten violence over things they didn't understand, and who was, for perhaps the first time in longer than he could remember, watching people he'd genuinely come to respect prepare to stand between him and that threat without hesitation. He stepped forward. Captain, he said quietly, permission to speak. Picard hesitated only a moment before nodding, curious despite the tension gripping the bridge. Gabriel moved into view of the view screen, meeting Sila's gaze directly, and something in his posture, easy, unbothered, utterly unimpressed by the warbird looming beyond the viewport, visibly gave the Romulan commander pause. Commander Sila, was it? Gabriel said, pleasant as ever, though something old and dangerous moved just beneath the surface of his tone. I'm going to save everyone here a lot of time. You want to study me, weaponize me, probably, if we're being honest about where that research eventually ends up. And I get it, I really do. Power like mine, it's tempting. Everybody wants a piece, eventually. His expression hardened, the easy humor falling away entirely. But here's the thing you should probably know before you decide whether those weapons of yours are worth powering up. I've had actual gods try to own me. Ancient, patient, genuinely terrifying beings who've been playing this exact game a lot longer than your empires existed. None of them managed it. I'd hate for you to find out the hard way just how far outside your weight class this particular negotiation actually is. Sila's composure flickered just slightly, the first genuine crack in her carefully maintained confidence since the transmission began. A bold claim, she said, though something more cautious had entered her voice. Not a claim, Gabriel said quietly. A courtesy. One warning freely given. Same as I'd offer anyone dumb enough to try this particular play. Take it or don't. But if you power up those weapons, Commander, you're not threatening a Federation starship anymore. You're threatening me. And I promise you, that math doesn't work out the way you're hoping." The bridge held its breath, Picard watching the exchange with careful, unreadable attention, as Commander Sela's gaze remained locked on Gabriel for a long, tense moment. Weighing, calculating, the particular Romulan instinct for self-preservation visibly warring with the ambition that had brought her this far. The silence stretched taut across the bridge, every officer present holding their position with the careful stillness of people watching a negotiation balanced on a knife's edge, until Commander Sela finally broke it with a short, considering laugh that carried no real humor. "You'll forgive me, Captain, if I find your guest's confidence somewhat difficult to verify from here." Sela's eyes remained fixed on Gabriel, sharp and assessing. "Bold claims are inexpensive. Demonstrations are considerably more persuasive. I'm not in the business of demonstrations for skeptical strangers," Gabriel said evenly. "But I'll tell you what I am in the business of: not letting good people get hurt because somebody decided my existence was worth the risk of finding out the hard way." Sela's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, some calculation shifting behind her composed expression. Picard, watching closely, recognized the particular hesitation of a commander recalculating odds she'd believed, moments earlier, to be entirely in her favor. "Commander," Picard said, stepping into the pause with the practiced diplomacy of a man who had defused considerably worse standoffs, "I would propose an alternative to armed confrontation. Whatever the Empire's genuine scientific interest in phenomena beyond current understanding, I doubt seriously that interest is served by a conflict that endangers your vessel, mine, and achieves nothing beyond mutual destruction. I am prepared to formally note the Empire's request through appropriate diplomatic channels. What I will not do is compel a sentient being under this ship's protection into custody against his will." Diplomatic channels. Sela's tone carried open skepticism, which historically resolved nothing, and conveniently allowed the Federation to retain whatever advantage it currently holds. "Perhaps," Picard acknowledged. "Or perhaps, Commander, you might consider that provoking a confrontation with a being who has, by his own account, already outlasted adversaries considerably more formidable than either of our governments, serves the Empire's interests rather poorly regardless of outcome. Victory costs you a warbird and whatever crew remains aboard it. Defeat costs you everything. I struggle to see where the calculation favors escalation." The bridge remained silent, tension coiled tight, as Sela weighed the captain's words against whatever calculus of ambition and self-preservation was turning behind her composed expression. Finally, her mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "You argue well, Captain, for a man defending a stranger who fell out of nowhere less than a week ago." Her gaze shifted back to Gabriel, something assessing and reluctantly respectful in it now. "Very well. I will withdraw for now. But mark this clearly, both of you. The Empire does not forget opportunities of this magnitude, nor does it abandon them permanently. If this entity proves as significant as this incident suggests, we will have this conversation again, under circumstances rather less generous than these." "Duly noted, Commander," Picard said, betraying nothing beyond calm, measured resolve. The transmission ended, and moments later Worf confirmed the Warbird's weapons had powered down, its cloak engaging as it withdrew from the Enterprise's proximity and vanished from sensors entirely. A collective breath seemed to move through the bridge, tension easing by careful degrees. "That," Riker said, exhaling, "could have gone considerably worse." "Indeed." Picard rose from his chair, turning to Gabriel with an expression that mixed genuine relief with something more searching. "That was a considerable risk you took, addressing her directly." "Wasn't really a risk," Gabriel admitted, some of the tension finally draining from his shoulders now that the immediate threat had passed. "I meant every word. I have gone toe-to-toe with things a lot scarier than one Romulan warbird, Captain. But," he paused, something more troubled surfacing beneath the relief, "that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Word's out now. Loki knows where I am. The Romulans know what I might be worth. And if they know, it's probably only a matter of time before somebody else starts asking the same questions. Every day I stay on this ship, I'm putting a target on all of you, whether I mean to or not." Troy, who had remained quietly attentive through the entire standoff, stepped closer, her expression gentle but firm. Gabriel, I sense you're already building toward a decision none of us have asked you to make. Maybe I am. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Maybe I should. You've all been more generous with me than I had any right to expect. And what have I brought you in return? A dead scientist. A wrecked research station. A Romulan warbird sitting off your bow, with its weapons hot. That's not exactly a fair trade, counselor. You did not ask for any of that to follow you here, Worf said, with the same blunt directness he'd shown days earlier in the observation lounge. The blame belongs to those who chose violence, not to the one they pursued. Maybe, Gabriel said again, though the word carried little conviction. Or maybe the honorable thing, Worf, is knowing when your presence costs more than it's worth, and having the decency to remove that cost before someone else pays it for you. Picard's expression sharpened, recognizing the particular shape of the conversation unfolding, a being wrestling, in real time, with exactly the kind of self-sacrificing calculus that had, Picard suspected, defined a considerable portion of Gabriel's long existence. Gabriel, he said, with quiet authority, I would ask you not to make that decision alone, nor in haste. This crew chose, collectively, to extend you protection, not out of obligation, but because it reflected who we believe ourselves to be. Removing yourself from that protection does not undo the choice already made. It merely denies us the chance to see it through. Gabriel looked up, something raw and uncertain crossing his features, the particular vulnerability of someone unaccustomed to being wanted rather than merely used. You really believe that? I do, Picard said simply. And I suspect, given the past several days, that this crew has come to believe it rather thoroughly as well. A quiet murmur of agreement moved across the bridge, Riker's firm nod, Worf's grim but genuine approval, Troy's warm, steady confirmation. Data's simple statement that logically, Gabriel's continued presence represented an opportunity for mutual understanding that outweighed the calculated risk. Gabriel absorbed it all with an expression that suggested he was, for perhaps the first time in longer than he cared to admit, genuinely moved rather than merely performing gratitude. Okay, he said finally quietly. Okay, I'll stay, for now. His expression hardened, resolve settling back into place. But that means we need to actually solve this. Not just survive the next threat that shows up, Loki, the Romulans, whoever else decides I'm worth the trouble. We need an actual plan. Because I promise you, Captain, this was just the opening round. Loki's not going to wait much longer before he tries something a lot worse than one wrecked research station. Picard's expression turned grave, already anticipating exactly the shape of the danger still ahead. Then let us ensure, he said, that when he does, we're considerably better prepared than we were for the last one. Across the ship, in the quiet of the science labs, Data and Crusher's ongoing analysis had already begun yielding its first genuine results. Fragments of understanding about the nature of angelic physiology that would, within another day, prove critical to surviving what was coming. But none of them yet knew how little time remained before Loki's patience finally ran out entirely, or how personal the coming confrontation was about to become. The breakthrough came at 0215 hours, in the quiet of the science lab where Data and Crusher had spent the better part of 3 days cross-referencing every scrap of physiological data Gabriel's cooperation had made possible. Crusher found Data still at his console when she returned from a brief rest period. His focus so absolute he hadn't registered the door opening. You found something, she said, reading it in the particular stillness of his posture. I believe so, Doctor. Data turned, and something in his expression, as close to excitement as his positronic matrix ever produced, suggested the breakthrough was significant. I have identified a consistent resonance pattern within Gabriel's energy signature, what he refers to as grace. It fluctuates subtly in response to emotional and psychological states, particularly states of significant distress or exertion. More importantly, I have found evidence in the trace readings recovered from Delta Sigma for that Loki's signature exhibits an identical resonance pattern, though calibrated somewhat differently. Meaning that while conventional weapons cannot affect either entity directly, a precisely tuned resonance field, modulated to interact destructively with that specific energy signature. Theoretically could. I have run the calculations 11 times, Doctor. The margin for error is considerable, and the field would need to be calibrated in real time, likely requiring Gabriel's direct cooperation to properly target Loki's signature without affecting his own. But it represents, to my analysis, the first genuine tactical countermeasure this crew has possessed since this crisis began. Crusher's eyes widened slightly. Data, if you're right, that's not just a countermeasure. That's a weapon that could actually hurt him. That is my assessment, yes. They brought the findings to Picard within the hour, and by 0900 the senior staff, along with Gabriel, whose reaction to the data had shifted from cautious hope to something more fiercely determined the longer data explained the underlying physics, had gathered once more in the observation lounge to weigh what came next. If this works, Gabriel said, studying the technical schematics data had prepared with an intensity that suggested he understood considerably more of the underlying principles than his casual manner usually let on. This isn't just about Loki. This is a way to actually even the odds against something like him. That's huge. Nobody's ever built something like this before. Not in my universe, anyway. We don't really do technology. We do miracles, or we do nothing. The application remains untested, Data cautioned, and significant risk remains. Any field powerful enough to disrupt Loki's signature would need to be calibrated with extreme precision, deployed at close range, and would likely require you to draw his attention directly, to bait him into proximity, in essence, while the field charges and targets. Bait, Worf repeated grimly. You are describing a plan that places Gabriel in direct, deliberate danger. I'm aware, Gabriel said, and I'm also aware that it's probably the only real shot we've got at actually ending this instead of just surviving the next round. I've been running from this fight for longer than your species has had written history, Worf. Running hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. Maybe it's time I stop trying to just outlast him and actually finish this. Picard studied the proposal with the careful weight of a commander who had sent people into danger before and never done so lightly. The risk to you personally would be considerable, he said, if the field's calibration proves imperfect, or if Loki anticipates the tactic. Then I probably die or worse, Gabriel finished, with a bluntness that startled several people in the room. Yeah, I know the stakes, Captain. Better than anyone here, probably. But I'll tell you what I've realized these past few days, watching all of you. He looked around the table. Something genuinely moved beneath the resolve in his expression. I spent millennia convinced that the only way to survive my family's war was to disappear from it entirely. Never fight, never commit, never let anyone matter enough that losing them would actually hurt. And then I fall through a door into a universe that isn't even mine, and in less than a week, you people give me more reason to actually fight for something than my own family managed in 4 billion years. His voice roughened just slightly. I'm not running anymore. If there's a real chance to end this, to make sure Loki can't keep hurting people because of me, I'm taking it. Whatever the risk. The observation lounge fell quiet, the weight of the decision settling over everyone present. Troy, watching Gabriel with careful empathic attention, spoke gently into the silence. I don't sense recklessness in that choice, she said. I sense someone who has finally found something worth the risk of caring about. That's different. Picard held Gabriel's gaze for a long moment, weighing command responsibility against the plain, hard-won conviction in front of him. The same calculation he'd made countless times before, sending officers into danger for causes worth the cost. Very well, he said finally. We will proceed, but on my terms, and with every precaution this crew can bring to bear. Mr. Data, I want that resonance field built, tested to the fullest extent our simulations allow, and integrated with ship's tactical systems before we take a single further step. Mr. Worf, full security contingency planning, assuming Loki does not simply walk into whatever trap we set for him without complication. He won't, Gabriel said grimly. He's smart, and he's going to know exactly what we're trying to do the moment I start acting like I'm ready for a fight instead of running from one. We're not going to fool him with subtlety. We need something that makes it look like desperation, not strategy. Then let us make it convincing. Picard said. Counselor Troy, Commander Riker, I want a scenario constructed that will draw Loki's attention under conditions we control, without revealing our actual intent until the field is ready to deploy. Something that plays to his evident enjoyment of games and provocation. Riker's expression sharpened with the particular focus of a tactician assembling a plan. If he thinks Gabriel's on the ropes, cornered, desperate, maybe even willing to bargain, that might be exactly the kind of opening he can't resist. Trickster like that, Captain. He won't be able to help himself. Bait within bait, Gabriel said, something almost admiring in his tone. I like it. Might actually work. Over the following 6 hours, the plan took careful shape. Data's resonance field integrated painstakingly into a modified tactical array disguised within one of the ship's secondary shuttle bays, Troy and Riker constructing a scenario calibrated precisely to Loki's known appetite for drama and easy victories. Worf's security teams positioned with contingencies layered upon contingencies. Gabriel spent the hours in quiet, focused preparation, running through the plan's failure points with Data again and again, determined to leave as little as possible to chance. It was nearly 2,100 hours when Crusher found him alone in the shuttle bay, running a final check on the resonance emitters with an intensity that suggested he hadn't stopped moving since the meeting had ended. You should rest, she said. Whatever tomorrow brings, you'll face it better prepared if you're not running on fumes. Angels don't really need rest, Doctor. Perk of the job. Gabriel didn't look up from his work, though something in his posture suggested the deflection was more habit than truth. Besides, can't really afford to relax right now. Too much riding on getting this right. Crusher studied him for a long moment. The particular clinical warmth she extended to every patient under her care settling into something more personal. For what it's worth, she said, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already changed something on this ship, Gabriel. However this ends. Gabriel finally looked up, something raw and uncertain crossing his features. Yeah, he said quietly. Funny thing about that. I came through that door running from a family that never really saw me as anything but a weapon or a disappointment. And here I am, less than a week later, about to risk everything for people I met 6 days ago. He managed a small, genuine smile. Guess that's the joke my father never bothered to explain. Sometimes the family you find matters more than the one you're born into. Outside the shuttle bay, unnoticed by either of them, the ship's sensors registered, for just a fraction of a second, a faint, familiar disturbance rippling through local subspace, patient and amused, already sensing that tomorrow's game was about to begin in earnest. The trap sprang precisely as planned, though nothing about the following hour would go entirely as anyone had rehearsed. Troy and Riker's constructed scenario had unfolded over the ship's internal comms, and a carefully staged argument in a corridor near the shuttle bay. Gabriel, apparently cornered by Worf's security detail after a staged escape attempt, voice raised in what sounded, to any listening ear tuned for exactly this kind of drama, like genuine desperation. Asterisk, you don't understand what you're dealing with. I need off this ship. I need somewhere he can't find me. Asterisk, the bait had been laid with careful attention to Loki's particular hungers, not brute conflict, but the far more delicious spectacle of watching someone he considered beneath him finally break. It worked exactly as Gabriel had predicted. The temperature in Shuttle Bay 2 dropped by exactly the same fraction of a degree it had the first time Loki's presence had rippled through local space, and the trickster resolved out of the shadows near the bay's far wall with the easy, delighted amusement of someone arriving precisely on cue for a performance he'd been anticipating all day. Well now, Loki said, glancing around the shuttle bay with theatrical appreciation, taking in Gabriel standing alone near the center of the space, apparently unarmed, apparently exactly as cornered as the staged commotion had suggested. Isn't this cozy? I do love it when you make things easy for me, brother. Really takes the sport out of it, but I suppose I can't complain. Loki. Gabriel's voice carried the exact register of exhaustion the plan required. Real exhaustion, too, if anyone had looked closely enough. 6 days of accumulated fear and hope and impossible decisions finally showing through. I'm done running. You win. Whatever you want from me, whatever game you think this is, I'm not going to keep dragging innocent people into it. How noble. Loki's grin sharpened, stepping further into the bay, entirely unaware of the resonance array humming quietly to life within the disguised tactical housing along the shuttle bay ceiling, calibrating in real time to the precise frequency of his approaching signature. Truly, Gabriel, I almost admire it. You always did have that streak, caring too much, right up until it cost you everything. He tilted his head, studying his brother with genuine, hungry curiosity. Tell me, though, what exactly did you think this little surrender would accomplish? You know, I'm not simply going to let you disappear quietly. Not after everything. I know, Gabriel said quietly. That's kind of the point. The field activated a half-second later. Data's calculations proving precise in the critical instant that mattered most. A resonance wave rippling outward from the concealed emitters, tuned exactly to the frequency of Loki's borrowed grace. And for one brief, electric moment, the trickster's easy confidence shattered into genuine, startled agony as the field tore into something in his very substance that no conventional weapon had ever managed to touch. What? Loki staggered, the theatrical amusement gone entirely, replaced by something raw and furious, and, for the first time since his arrival, genuinely afraid. What is this? Something new, Gabriel said, stepping forward now, the exhaustion in his posture replaced by hard, focused resolve. Something my family never had to worry about, back home. Turns out mortals build things, Loki. Clever things. Things that don't care how old or strong you think you are. Loki's eyes blazed with fury, the shock of genuine injury visibly recalibrating everything he believed about the situation. You planned this. The whole pathetic display, the running, the desperation. All of it, Gabriel confirmed. Guess you're not the only one who still knows how to run a con. Loki lunged, faster than the eye could properly track, raw power gathering around him in a desperate, furious bid to end the confrontation before the resonance field could fully lock onto him. And Gabriel met the attack head-on, the two archangels colliding in a burst of light and force that sent shockwaves rattling through the shuttle bay's reinforced bulkheads, alarms blaring shipwide as wharf security teams scrambled toward positions they'd rehearsed but never truly expected to need. The fight that followed lasted less than 90 seconds, though to everyone watching through the shuttle bay's security feed, crowded anxiously around monitors on the bridge, it felt considerably longer. Gabriel and Loki trading blows that defied conventional physics entirely, reality itself seeming to bend and warp around the epicenter of their struggle. The resonance field steady hum audible even beneath the chaos, as it continued relentlessly recalibrating, tightening its hold on Loki's signature with every passing second. Captain, Data reported from the bridge, voice tight with barely restrained urgency. The field is achieving lock. Estimated full effect in approximately 20 seconds. Can Gabriel hold him that long? Picard demanded. Unknown, sir. On the shuttle bay floor, Gabriel staggered under a blow that sent him skidding backward across the deck plating, blood, or something that passed for it, golden and faintly luminous, trickling from a cut above his eye. Loki advanced on him with murderous, furious intent, all pretense of games entirely abandoned now. You should have stayed hidden, Loki snarled, raw power crackling around clenched fists. You should have kept running, brother. At least then I'd have let you live long enough to regret it. Yeah, Gabriel said, pushing himself back to his feet with visible effort, something fierce and unbroken burning behind his exhausted expression. Probably should have. But I found something better than hiding, Loki. Found people worth staying for. He met his brother's eyes, and for the first time since the confrontation began, something almost like pity crossed his features. You never understood that. Never wanted to. That's the real difference between us. Not power. Not age. You never once found anything worth this. The resonance field achieved full lock in the same instant Loki lunged for what he clearly intended as a final decisive blow. And the world seemed to shudder, light bending impossibly around the shuttle bay as the field's accumulated effect finally, fully engaged, tearing into Loki's grace with a violence that sent him screaming backward, the borrowed human form flickering and destabilizing under the strain. This isn't over, Loki gasped, staggering, the fury in his voice now edged with something that sounded unmistakably like fear. You hear me, Gabriel? This is not. The field's final pulse cut him off entirely, and with a wrenching, tearing sound that seemed to fold space itself, Loki simply vanished, not defeated permanently. Gabriel would later explain to the assembled senior staff, grace of that nature couldn't truly be destroyed by any weapon short of the kind wielded by beings far above either of them, but wounded badly enough, and thrown far enough by the resonance field's violent expulsion, that he would need considerable time to recover before attempting anything so bold again. The shuttle bay fell suddenly eerily silent, alarms cutting off one by one as Worf's security team burst through the doors to find Gabriel alone, kneeling amid scorched deck plating, breathing hard, the golden light of his true nature flickering visibly beneath skin that had, for one unguarded moment, stopped bothering to hide what he truly was. Gabriel. Crusher was at his side within seconds, tricorder already scanning, medical training overriding whatever awe she might otherwise have felt at what she was witnessing. "Talk to me. What's your status?" "Hurts," Gabriel admitted, with something that might have been a laugh, breathless and genuine. "Actually hurts, for the first time in longer than I can remember. Kind of nice, honestly. Means I'm still real enough to feel it." Picard arrived moments later, taking in the scorched shuttle bay, the exhausted but unmistakably victorious figure kneeling at its center, with an expression that mixed profound relief with something more searching. "He's gone." "Wounded," Gabriel confirmed, accepting Crusher's help to his feet with visible effort. "Badly. He won't be back any time soon, Captain. Might be years, by your reckoning, before he's strong enough to try this again. Could be longer." He met Picard's eyes, something settled and resolved in his exhausted expression. "I bought us time. Real time. Enough that whatever comes next, it won't be him, not for a long while." Picard studied him for a long moment, weighing the cost of the victory against the plain relief evident on every face around him. "You did more than buy time, Gabriel," he said finally. "You made a choice back there. A costly one, and a brave one. I suspect that choice mattered rather more than the tactical victory itself." Gabriel managed a tired, genuine smile, glancing around at the assembled crew, Worf's grim, approving nod, Crusher's careful attention still monitoring his readings, Riker's visible relief, Troy's warm, knowing understanding of exactly what had shifted in him over these past extraordinary days. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you might be right about that, Captain." Somewhere beyond the ship, in a universe he had spent millennia fleeing, something ancient stirred at the faint, unmistakable ripple of an archangel's grace suddenly wounded and exposed, a ripple that would, in time, draw attention Gabriel had not yet begun to consider. But for now, in the scorched quiet of Shuttle Bay 2, surrounded by people who had chosen, without hesitation, to stand beside him against a threat that should never have been theirs to face, Gabriel allowed himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to simply feel safe. The Enterprise resumed its diplomatic course toward Ephros 4 days later, the shuttle bay repaired, the crew gradually settling back into the rhythms of routine service after a week that had upended nearly everything they'd believed about the shape of the universe. But Gabriel's presence aboard remained, and with it, a question that had been quietly building since the moment the resonance field's final pulse sent Loki screaming into retreat. What came next? Picard summoned him to the ready room on the fourth morning, the same space where Gabriel had first laid out the true shape of the war he was fleeing, though the atmosphere between them now carried none of the careful wariness of that first conversation. "Starfleet Command has reviewed my full report," Picard said, without preamble. "The incident at Delta Sigma 4, the Romulan encounter, the confrontation in Shuttle Bay 2. I won't pretend the discussion was simple. There are officers within command who would prefer you were studied rather than sheltered, who see, not unreasonably, from a purely strategic standpoint, considerable value in understanding a being of your capabilities more thoroughly." Gabriel's expression tightened, old wariness resurfacing despite everything. And I argued successfully that the Federation's founding principles extend as readily to beings from realities we do not yet understand as to any species within our own galaxy. You are not a specimen, Gabriel, nor a strategic asset to be leveraged. You are a sentient being who sought refuge, and who has, in the course of finding it, demonstrated considerably more integrity than many I have encountered who were born within Federation space. Picard's expression softened, just slightly. Starfleet Command has agreed, provisionally, to recognize you as a political refugee under Federation protection. What you choose to do with that protection is entirely your own decision. Gabriel absorbed this for a long moment, something visibly shifting behind his exhausted, grateful expression. I don't really know what to do with that, he admitted. Nobody's ever just given me somewhere to belong before, not without expecting something in return. Then perhaps, Picard said, it's time you learned what that felt like. The choice, when Gabriel finally made it 3 days later, surprised no one who had watched him these past 2 weeks, least of all Guinan, who had sensed the shape of it from the very first night in 10 Forward. He would not stay permanently aboard the Enterprise. Picard had made clear the offer was open, but Gabriel, with the particular restlessness of a being who had spent millennia either running or fighting, and had only just begun learning what neither felt like, chose instead a quieter path. Relocation to a small Federation research colony on the fringes of explored space, where his unique knowledge of realities beyond the Federation's current understanding could be shared carefully, deliberately, on his own terms rather than extracted by force. Starfleet would maintain a discreet protective presence. Gabriel would, for the first time in his existence, simply live. You could stay, Aquino told him on his last evening aboard, finding him once more in the small observation gallery where their first real conversation had unfolded weeks earlier. You've kind of grown on this crew, in case you hadn't noticed. I noticed. Gabriel's smile was warm, genuine, none of the old deflecting humor in it now. That's actually part of why I need to go, kid. I spent so long being defined by what I was running from. The war, my family, Loki, all of it. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not running from anything at all. Can't really do that if I stay tucked safely behind Starfleet's biggest, shiniest ship. Fair enough. Aquino extended a hand, and Gabriel shook it with a formality that carried real weight beneath the simple gesture. For what it's worth, my grandmother would have loved this. Knowing that whatever's out there, it turned out to have this much heart in it. Tell her, Gabriel said quietly, that whatever else haven't got wrong, it got the idea of grace right eventually. Just took longer than anyone expected, and came from a place nobody was looking. The farewell gathered nearly the entire senior staff in the transporter room the following morning, an unusual formality for what was, technically, simply a shuttle transfer to a waiting Federation vessel, but one that reflected, more honestly than any official record could, exactly how thoroughly this stranger had reshaped the past 2 weeks aboard the Enterprise. Take care of yourself, Crusher said, pressing a small medical kit into his hands with the particular fussing insistence of a doctor who had grown genuinely fond of an impossible patient. And come back if that shoulder acts up again. I mean it. Wouldn't dream of ignoring doctor's orders. Gabriel's grin was easy, warm. Worf offered a formal nod that carried, beneath its Klingon reserve, genuine respect. You fought with honor, Gabriel. Few outside my own people earned that assessment from me so quickly. High praise, big guy. I'll carry it. Data extended a hand, his expression carrying the particular thoughtful curiosity that had defined their entire acquaintance. I confess I remain uncertain how to fully categorize the philosophical implications of your existence, Gabriel. I suspect I will be considering the question for some time. Good, Gabriel said, shaking his hand warmly. Means I made an impression. That's usually the best any of us can hope for. Troy's farewell was quieter, more personal, a warm embrace and a whispered acknowledgement that needed no elaboration between them, the counselor's empathic sense confirming, one final time, the genuine peace that had settled over him these past days. Riker's handshake was firm, soldier to soldier despite the vast gulf between their natures. Godspeed, Gabriel. Whatever that means, coming from you. Means more than you'd think, Commander, Gabriel said, something almost wistful in his expression. Means considerably more than you'd think. Picard approached last, and the two of them regarded each other with a particular understanding that had grown, gradually and genuinely, across 2 extraordinary weeks. Captain, Gabriel said, I don't really have the words for what you and this crew gave me. Not sure 4 billion years of existence really prepared me for it. Then don't search for the words, Picard said. Simply carry what you've learned forward, and extend to others the same grace this crew extended to you. That, I suspect, would be gratitude enough. Gabriel nodded, something settled and whole in his expression that had been entirely absent the night he'd first stumbled, disoriented and running, into an empty cargo bay 2 weeks earlier. He stepped onto the transporter pad, glancing once more around the assembled faces that had, against every reasonable expectation, become something he would carry with him for however long his considerable existence continued. For what it's worth, he said, you people didn't just save my life out here. You reminded me what it was worth saving for. That's a debt I don't think I'll ever really finish repaying. Then don't think of it as a debt, Picard said. Think of it as a beginning. The transporter beam took him a moment later, gold light dissolving into the familiar shimmer of Starfleet technology, carrying an archangel who had once believed himself defined entirely by war and flight toward a future he had, for the first time in his impossibly long existence, genuinely chosen for himself. In the weeks that followed, the crew of the Enterprise D returned to the steady rhythm of exploration and diplomacy that defined their mission, the memory of Gabriel's brief, extraordinary passage through their lives settling into something between legend and quiet personal truth, spoken of rarely in official reports, but carried individually by everyone who had witnessed it. Ensign Aquino kept, tucked discreetly among her personal effects, a small handwritten note Gabriel had left her before departing, 6 words, in a looping, old-fashioned script that felt entirely at odds with the technology surrounding it. Your grandmother was right all along. Data continued, quietly and persistently, to wrestle with questions of faith and evidence that Gabriel's brief presence had irrevocably complicated, questions he suspected, with characteristic honesty, he would spend decades, if not centuries, still turning over, and far beyond the edges of explored space, in a place that was not quite a place, an ancient trickster nursed wounds that would take considerably longer than anticipated to heal, harboring a grudge that would, eventually, resurface, though not for many years, and not before an archangel had built, on the fringes of Federation space, something he had never once believed himself capable of, a life worth defending, chosen freely, belonging entirely and finally to himself. Whether that peace would last forever, no one, not Picard, not Guinan, not even Gabriel himself, could honestly say. The universe, as the Enterprise's crew had learned rather thoroughly across 2 extraordinary weeks, rarely offered guarantees of permanence. But it did occasionally offer grace, and sometimes, against every reasonable expectation, that proved to be enough. The Enterprise D never spoke of that week aloud, not really, not in any official capacity beyond the sealed report locked away in Picard's private files, and not in casual conversation among a crew who understood, without needing to discuss it, that some things are better carried quietly than turned into legend. But it changed them anyway, in ways too subtle for any censor to measure. For Jean-Luc Picard, it confirmed something he had suspected since his first encounter with Q, years before Gabriel ever fell through that impossible door, that the universe's vastness was not merely a matter of distance and starlight, but of categories of existence the Federation's careful, rational framework had never been built to fully contain. He did not become a believer, not in any conventional sense, but he became, if possible, a more patient one, a captain slightly less certain that the boundaries of the known represented the boundaries of the real, and considerably more willing to extend trust to the inexplicable before demanding it explain itself. For Data, the questions Gabriel left behind proved far more durable than the Archangel himself. He would spend years, decades perhaps, turning over the strange, unresolved territory between faith and evidence, between belief and proof, without ever quite reaching the tidy conclusion his positronic processes instinctively sought. He came, eventually, to consider this less a failure of understanding than a kind of gift, proof that even a being built entirely from logic could hold a genuine, unanswered wonder, and be better for it. For Worf, the encounter offered something simpler and no less profound, confirmation that honor was not the exclusive property of any one species, world, or war, and that restraint, chosen freely in the face of overwhelming power, was its own form of courage. He never spoke of Gabriel without a certain gravity entering his voice, the particular respect a warrior reserves for another warrior who chose, when it mattered most, mercy over conquest. For Ensign Aquino, and for the quiet handful of crew members who had wrestled openly with what Gabriel's existence meant for questions they'd long assumed were settled, the answers remained genuinely unresolved. But unresolved, they came to understand, was not the same as meaningless. The universe had grown stranger and larger in the span of a single week, and somehow that expansion made the small, ordinary, hard-won goodness of a Starfleet crew doing right by a frightened stranger feel more significant, not less. And somewhere far beyond the reach of any subspace signal, in a conflict that predated the Federation by unimaginable eons, an archangel who had once defined his existence entirely by escape carried something new into an old, exhausted war, the memory of a ship, a captain, and a crew who had asked nothing of him except honesty, and had given him, in return, the first genuine home he had known in 4 billion years. Whatever became of that war, whatever it eventually cost him, he no longer walked into it alone in spirit. He walked into it changed. The Enterprise D continued on its way, resuming its long and quiet work of exploration, carrying forward into the dark exactly what it always had: curiosity, principle, and an unshakable belief that even the strangest, most impossible arrivals deserved to be met with an open hand rather than a closed fist. Some doors, once opened, never fully close again, but some are worth having opened all the same. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more epic, what-if adventures like this, consider supporting the channel by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or the pinned comment. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps bring more stories like this to life, and your support truly means a lot. Thank you for being part of the journey. May the Force be with you. More stories await.